Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Laura Mercer. I'm a geologist, which means I study rocks and how they form. My professors always said I had a gift for seeing patterns that others missed. I guess that's why I ended up here, in this ghost town called Salvation, smack in the middle of the Nevada desert. It's 1957, and I've been sent to study some strange crystals found in the old silver mines. The town's been empty since 1932. That's 25 years of dust, tumbleweeds, and silence. The mining company papers said there was still plenty of silver left when they shut down. Nobody really knows why they left so suddenly. I set up my little lab in the old mining office. It's just one room with a desk, some shelves, and windows so dirty I had to scrub them for an hour before any light would come through. I brought my microscope, cameras, and enough notebooks to write a book. The company lets me use their old cabin nearby. It's small, but has a bed and a stove, which is all I really need. My days follow the same pattern: wake up at sunrise, eat something quick, then head out to collect samples. The mines are dark and cool compared to the baking heat outside. I chisel off bits of rock, put them in labeled bags, and take them back to study. The crystals here are unlike anything I've seen before. They don't match any of the patterns in my textbooks. They almost seem to change when you're not looking directly at them. At night, I work by lamplight in the cabin, writing down everything I've seen and photographed. I've always been good at keeping detailed notes. The dreams started about a week after I arrived. At first, I thought they were just strange sleep images, the kind you get when you're in a new place. But they felt so real. I dreamed of Salvation when it was alive. Men in dusty work clothes heading to the mines, women hanging laundry between buildings, children playing in what's now just empty dirt roads. I could hear their voices, smell the wood smoke from chimneys, even feel the fabric of my dress. Except it wasn't my dress. In the dreams, I wasn't me. What makes it truly odd is how specific these dreams are. I know people's names, their problems, who's fighting with whom. I know that Mrs. Addison's boy has a cough that won't go away, and that Mr. Peterson at the general store waters down his whiskey. How could I know these things about people who were gone long before I was born? The town. Records were still in the office when I arrived, stacked in neat piles, as if someone expected to come back any day. The dust was thick enough to write my name in, but the papers inside the folders were in perfect condition. Birth records, death certificates, mining reports. They tell the story of a normal town, until the last few months before it closed. Then there are strange gaps, missing pages, entries that stop mid-sentence. The landscape around Salvation is beautiful, but not quite right. There are huge rock formations that stick out of the flat desert like giants' teeth. The first time I mapped them, I drew their positions carefully. 3 days later, I went back and something seemed off. When I checked my map, they didn't match. 2 of the largest formations seemed to have shifted position by several feet. That's impossible, of course. Rocks don't move by themselves, especially ones that big. I must have made a mistake in my first drawings. Yesterday, something happened that I can't explain away so easily. I left my cabin at dawn, everything neat and organized as I always keep it. My notes in a stack by my bed, my clothes folded on the chair, my hairbrush on the table. I spent the day at the North Mine, carefully cataloging crystal formations. When I came back just before sunset, tired and dusty, I found everything rearranged. My notes were in 3 precise piles. My clothes had been refolded differently. My hairbrush was on the windowsill. I know I didn't leave it that way, and I know no one else is here. This morning I met someone, the first person I've seen in weeks. An old Paiute man named Samuel Nighthawk. He was gathering plants near some ancient rock carvings I hadn't noticed before. The carvings showed strange, swirling shapes that seemed to form and unform into a figure as you looked at them. When I asked him about the town, he just shook his head and said, "The silver brought them. The other things sent them away." He wouldn't explain what he meant. Today I found something that truly scared me. I was clearing out a corner of the mining office to make more space for my samples when I moved an old filing cabinet. Behind it was a small leather purse. The leather was supple, not dried out as it should be after 25 years. Inside was a handkerchief with the initials EM embroidered in the corner, a tube of bright red lipstick, and a small notebook. The notebook had dates from 1932 and belonged to someone named Elizabeth Miller. The last entry said, "Something is wrong with this place. The shadows move when no one is casting them." I know I searched that corner when I first arrived. That purse wasn't there. It couldn't have been there. But now it is. I'm starting to think I'm not as alone in salvation as I thought. I need to take pictures of everything now. It's the only way I can trust what I see. Yesterday, I set up my camera in the main street to photograph some unusual rock samples I'd collected. The sun was getting low, making everything golden. As I focused the lens, something moved at the edge of my sight. A shape, person-sized, slipped between two buildings. My heart jumped into my throat. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I took the pictures anyway, my hands shaking slightly. When I developed them later in my makeshift darkroom, I went through each one carefully. Nothing unusual appeared in any of them, but I know what I saw. Today I found Samuel again, or maybe he found me. He was sitting on a rock outcropping where I often eat my lunch. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked without looking at me. "Seen what?" I asked, though something in me already knew. "The hollower," he said quietly. "That's what my people call it. The thing that eats memories and leaves dust behind." I wanted to laugh, to tell him that was just a superstition, but after what I've been experiencing, I couldn't. "What is it?" I asked instead. Samuel sighed. "Something very old. It was here before the silver, before us, maybe before anything. It sleeps most of the time. The mining woke it up." He told me how the hollower feeds on human experiences and memories, how it can pull them right out of your head, leaving empty spaces behind, how it grows stronger with each feeding until it can take physical form using the dust of the desert. Didn't want to believe him, but that night my dreams changed. I wasn't just seeing the town anymore, I was living as someone else. I was Mary Dawson, a young mother with 2 children. I could feel her tiredness after washing clothes all day. I could feel her worry about her husband down in the mines. I knew exactly how her younger boy liked his hair ruffled, but the older, one thought he was too grown up for that now. When I woke up, I was crying, missing children I've never had. This morning I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. My journal, the one where I write down all my findings, has changed. Entries from my first week here describe crystal formations I never wrote about. The handwriting is mine, every loop and cross exactly how I write. But the words aren't. What I put down. One paragraph describes a shifting lattice structure that appears to respond to human proximity. I never wrote that. I never saw that. Someone or something is changing my notes, or worse, changing what I remember writing. The mirrors in the cabin are becoming places I avoid looking. Twice now I've seen movement in them when I'm perfectly still. A swirling, dusty shape that almost looks human. When I turn around, nothing's there, but in the mirror, just for a second, something watches me. I went deeper into the main mine today, looking for more samples. The electric lantern cast strange shadows on the walls. On one of the old wooden support beams, I found carvings. They weren't in English and they looked very old. I copied them as best I could and showed them to Samuel later. His face went pale. "These are warnings," he said. "My great-grandfather's generation put them there. They say, beware that which wears the skin of memory. They tried to keep people away from this place. The samples I collect keep changing overnight. I'm not imagining this. I've started taking photographs of them each evening before I sleep. In the morning, the crystals have rearranged themselves. Structures that should take thousands of years to form appear in hours. It's as if they're growing, but not in any way that makes scientific sense. Yesterday at sunset, something even stranger happened. The light hit the town just right, and for a moment salvation wasn't abandoned anymore. I saw buildings with fresh paint, heard piano music from the saloon, smelled bread baking. I even saw people walking on the street as real as I am. Then I blinked, and it was all dust and ruins again. A mirage, but so complete, I could have sworn it was real. Today I found something in the office records I missed before. The final report, from a mine inspector named James Collins, dated just 2 weeks before the town was abandoned. His handwriting gets messier as the report goes on. He writes about miners forgetting how to use their tools, about men who had worked the same job for 20 years, suddenly not knowing what to do. "It's as if their minds are being emptied," he wrote. The last page just trails off into scribbles. Samuel came to my cabin this evening. He looked worried. "My people have known about the Hollower for generations," he said. "We built protections around this valley, stones placed in certain patterns, rituals performed at the right times. We kept it contained." He looked out the window at the mine. Entrances, then the mining company came. They moved the stones. They dug where they shouldn't have. They broke the boundaries that kept it trapped. "If that's true, why didn't your people warn them?" I asked. Samuel gave me a sad smile. "They did. Who listens to old Indian stories about spirits in the rocks? They called us superstitious fools while they dug their own graves." As he left, he turned back. "It knows you're here now. It's already tasting your memories. Be careful what you think about. Be careful what you remember. It will go for what matters most to you first." Tonight, I double-checked that my door was locked before going to bed. Not that a lock would stop whatever is happening here, but it made me feel better somehow. I don't know how much longer I should stay, but something tells me that even if I tried to leave now, part of me would remain behind, the parts that the Hollower has already taken. Last night, a dust storm blew in. It came suddenly, with no warning from the clear sky. I was heading back to my cabin when the wind picked up. At first, it was just a breeze. Then it turned into something fierce. The air filled with dust so thick I could barely see. And that's when I saw it fully for the first time. In the heart of the swirling dust, a shape formed. At first, it looked like a person, a man in mining clothes. Then it shifted, becoming a woman with an old-fashioned dress. Then a child. The faces kept changing, becoming people I'd seen in my dreams, people who once lived in salvation. The dust never settled, just kept swirling and changing shape. It saw me watching. All those faces turned to look at me at once, even though they were all one thing. I ran back to my cabin and slammed the door, but I knew doors wouldn't stop it. This morning, something feels wrong in my head. I was making coffee and tried to remember my mother's face. I know what she looks like. I've seen her every day of my life. But there's a blank spot now. I can remember her voice, her laugh, the cookies she baked every Sunday, but her face is just gone. The Hollower took it from me. I tried to draw her, to bring the memory back, but my hand wouldn't make the right lines. It's like that part of my brain has been scooped out, leaving nothing behind. Even stranger, I now have memories that aren't mine. I clearly remember working in the Salvation General Store, arranging cans on shelves and measuring out flour for customers. I remember the way Mr. Wilson always tried to bargain down the price of tobacco, and how Mrs. Harper bought peppermint sticks for the children every Friday. But I've never worked in a store. These aren't my memories. The Hollower isn't just taking, it's giving too. Replacing pieces of me with pieces of people, it's already consumed. Today I watched it form itself out of dust in broad daylight. It stood in the middle of the street, becoming more solid by the minute. It made itself look like a young man I'd seen in my dreams, Thomas Jenkins, who worked as an assayer in the mining office. Then it spoke with his voice. "You're starting to understand, Laura. It knows my name. We remember you," it said in a voice that was both one and many. "We remember everyone." It raised a hand, and the dust around it swirled up, forming a perfect copy of my research table, with every paper and rock sample exactly where I'd left them. Then it changed again, becoming a little girl with pigtails. "Do you want to play?" it asked, and then dissolved back into swirling dust that blew away. Samuel came to warn me today. He said the Hollower isn't just feeding on memories, it's feeding on entire identities. It doesn't just want what you remember, it wants who you are. It will replace you bit by bit, he told me. First memories, then thoughts, then feelings. By the end, there's nothing left but empty clothes. That's when I realized the truth about what happened here in 1932. The town didn't close. The people didn't leave. They were consumed. I found a box of old clothes in one of the houses today. They were laid out neatly on a bed as if someone had been wearing them 1 minute and was just gone the next. A dress, stockings, shoes, all arranged in the shape of a person, but with no person inside. The dust storms are getting worse. Samuel says they're not natural. The Hollower creates them, using them to strip away memories from anyone caught in them. That's why I lost my mother's face after the storm last night. I sent a letter to my research mentor, Dr. Harrison, 2 weeks ago, asking about these strange crystals. His reply came today. What he wrote chilled me. "Laura, I've seen these formations before. They appear in records of 3 other abandoned settlements across the southwest. I sent researchers to each one. None returned. That's why I sent you. I thought a woman's different perspective might reveal what we're missing. Be careful, there's more there than rocks." He sent me here knowing it was dangerous, knowing others had disappeared. I'm starting to question what's real. Yesterday, I had a conversation with my college roommate, Jenny. We sat on my porch and talked about old times. It felt completely real. The sound of her voice, the way she twirled her hair when she was thinking. We laughed about the time we snuck a cat into our dorm room. Then I remembered Jenny couldn't possibly be here. She's in Boston, 3,000 miles away. When I blinked, the porch was empty. The Hollower had created the entire scenario, so perfect I couldn't tell it wasn't real. The crystals I've been studying, I finally understand what they are. I broke one open today. Inside was a perfect miniature scene, a family sitting down to dinner. Not a picture, but a 3-dimensional moment, frozen in time, smaller than my thumbnail. When I touched it, I could hear their conversation in my head, feel the father's tiredness after a day in the mines, taste the slightly burned bread. These crystals are memories. Compressed, preserved memories of the people the Hollower has consumed. It's been showing me its collection all along. I don't know how much longer I can hold on to myself. Each day, I wake up with new gaps in my memory and new memories that aren't mine. I'm writing everything down now, hoping the paper will remember what my mind cannot. Samuel says the Hollower is stronger than he's ever seen it. It's been feeding. Well, it's been feeding on me. I woke up this morning to voices outside my cabin. For a moment I thought it was the Hollower playing tricks again. But when I looked out the window, I saw a jeep parked in front of the mining office. 3 people were unloading equipment, my colleagues from the university. Dr. Chen, Mike from the lab, and Judith from administration. Relief washed over me. Finally, real people. I rushed out to meet them, still in my night clothes. "Laura!" Dr. Chen called, waving. "We were worried when we didn't hear from you. Your last report was concerning. They looked so real. Judith was even wearing the blue scarf she always wears. Mike had that coffee stain on his shirt sleeve that never quite washed out." We spent the morning going over my findings. They were impressed by my crystal samples. Dr. Chen kept saying how I'd made an important discovery. It felt good to be validated after all these weeks alone. But then Mike said something odd. He mentioned a conference we both attended in Denver. I nodded along at first, then froze. I've never been to Denver, and Mike should know that. I looked more closely at my colleagues. They were perfect in almost every way. But when I asked Judith about her daughter's piano recital that she'd been so excited about before I left, she smiled blankly and changed the subject. These weren't my colleagues. They were constructions. The Hollower had created them, using pieces of my memories mixed with whatever it thought would convince me. "You're not real," I said quietly. Their faces changed then. Not all at once, but in small ways. Their eyes grew distant. Their smiles became fixed. And then, without a word, they turned to dust that blew away in the wind. After they disappeared, I found a folder they'd brought with them. Inside was a report about this place, written 3 years ago by Dr. Harrison himself. According to the university records, he came here in 1954 to study the same crystal formations. He never returned. The report was in his handwriting, detailing his discoveries about the Hollower. On the last page, in shaky letters, he'd written, "It's inside me now. I can feel it sorting through my memories like files in a cabinet, taking what it wants, leaving what it doesn't need. By the time anyone reads this, there won't be enough of me left to save. Dr. Harrison never sent me here. He's been part of the Hollower for 3 years. It used his memories of me, his trust in my abilities, to lure me here as fresh food. The entity is growing stronger every day. This morning, I watched it create an entire scene from the town's past right before my eyes. Not just a mirage this time, but a fully realized moment. Miners coming up from the shaft at the end of a shift, women greeting them, children playing in the street. I could smell cooking food from the houses, hear conversations, feel the evening breeze. It lasted for nearly an hour before fading away. The Hollower can create entire realities now, sustained by all the memories it has consumed, including some of mine. Last night, something even more terrifying happened. I wasn't just dreaming about someone else's life. I became them. I was Thomas Jenkins, the young assayer. I felt his shock when he first realized something was wrong with the town. I experienced his growing horror as he watched his friends forget their own names. And I felt him die, felt the Hollower pull him apart, memory by memory, until there was nothing left but dust on the floor of the very office I'm using now. When I woke up screaming, I wasn't fully myself again. I kept reaching for a pocket watch I've never owned. I found myself whistling a tune Thomas used to whistle when he was checking ore samples. Parts of him are still inside me. Today, I found something in the town church that explains so much. Behind the altar, in a small room that must have been used for storage, there are hundreds of tiny crystal clusters arranged on shelves. Each one is labeled with a name, the names of Salvation's residents. I picked one up, Mary Dawson, the woman I dreamed of being. Immediately, I could feel her presence, her thoughts, her fears. These crystals are a kind of library or museum. The Hollower keeps pieces of everyone it's taken preserved in crystal form. That's when it spoke to me again, forming itself from dust in the corner of the room. "Do you understand now?" it asked, wearing the face of Dr. Harrison this time. "I am preservation. I am memory eternal." It explained in its strange, shifting voice that its goal wasn't just to feed. It wanted to create a perfect, eternal moment, a complete world, built from all human experiences, frozen in crystal form. A place where nothing would ever be forgotten or lost. "Your human minds are so fragile," it said. "Memories fade. People die. Their experiences disappear. I save them. But it doesn't just save memories, it takes them. It empties people and fills the holes with pieces of others. I can't trust my own mind anymore. Last night, I read back through my journal and found entries I don't remember writing. Detailed accounts of days I can't recall spending. The handwriting is mine, but the experiences aren't. The Hollower has been replacing me bit by bit since I arrived. It's like those old puzzles where you remove one piece at a time until the whole structure collapses. It's rebuilt part of the town now. When I woke this morning, the general store across the street wasn't a ruin anymore. It stood whole and painted, with goods visible in the windows. The saloon 2 buildings down has a new sign swinging in the breeze. A horse, a real horse, stands hitched outside it. The Hollower is recreating salvation around me, building it from the dust and memories of those it's consumed. This afternoon, Samuel appeared again, but this time he had a bundle with him. Old things wrapped in buckskin, Paiute artifacts that he said were used in the old days to fight the Hollower. These won't stop it, he told me, but they can confuse it, give you moments of clarity. He showed me how to use them. Patterns of stones, bundles of herbs that give off a sharp smell when burned, chants in his language that sound like the wind through canyon walls. When I tried them, the rebuilt general store flickered, showing its true ruined form. For a moment, my head felt clearer than it had in days. That's when I made a discovery that might save me. The herbs Samuel brought made one of my crystal samples crack. Inside, I found contradictory memories stored together. 2 people remembering the same event differently. The crystal couldn't maintain its structure with those opposing forces inside it. If I can force the Hollower to consume contradictory memories simultaneously, I might be able to trap it inside its own crystal prison. It's a slim chance, but it's the only one I have left. I don't have much time left. The town is almost fully rebuilt now. I can see people, or what look like people, walking the streets. They nod to me when I pass, call me by name. Sometimes I catch myself thinking this is normal, that I've always lived in salvation. Then I touch the small pouch of herbs Samuel gave me, and for a moment I remember who I really am. I have a plan. It's dangerous, maybe impossible, but I have to try. First, I went through all my journals, photographs, and notes. I studied them carefully, burning the most important details into my mind. These are my memory anchors, things I can hold on to when the Hollower tries to take my mind. My mother's birthday, the name of my first dog, the feel of my graduation cap, the taste of my grandmother's apple pie, small, precious things that make me who I am. Then I gathered all the crystal samples I've collected and arranged them in a circle in the mining office. Each contains memories of people the Hollower has already consumed. Together, they form a kind of trap. Samuel helped me draw the ritual boundaries his people have used for generations. Lines of red ochre on the floor, small stones placed at specific points, bundles of herbs hanging from the ceiling. This won't kill it, Samuel warned me. Nothing can kill it. But it might trap it for a while, long enough for you to get away. But I know something Samuel doesn't. From my scientific studies, I've learned that these crystals are unstable. When filled with contradicting information, they crack. If I can force the Hollower to take in contradictory memories all at once, it might trap itself. I didn't tell Samuel the most dangerous part of my plan. To trap the Hollower, I have to let it feed on me one last time. I have to let it in. Tonight is the night. The moon is dark. Samuel says that's when the Hollower is most active. I've prepared everything. My journals are open to key pages. My photographs are laid out. I've written notes to myself explaining who I am, in case I forget. I burned the herbs and spoke the words Samuel taught me. The smoke made patterns in the air that seemed to bend in impossible ways. Then I waited. It didn't take long. The dust began to gather in the center of the circle, swirling faster and faster. It formed into Dr. Harrison first, then shifted through. A dozen faces I recognized from my dreams, the people of salvation. I know what you're trying to do, it said in a voice made of many voices. It won't work. Maybe not, I answered. But I have something you want. I cut my palm with a small knife, just enough to draw blood. Blood carries memories, Samuel had told me. To the hollower, it's like the smell of fresh bread to a starving man. The dust swirled faster. The thing moved toward me, eager now. Take it, I said. Take my memories, and it did. I felt it enter my mind like cold fingers sorting through papers. It pulled at memories. My first day of school, my father teaching me to fish, the boy who kissed me at 16. Each one came loose, with a feeling like thread being pulled from fabric. But I was ready. As it fed on me, I focused hard on the contradictions I'd prepared. I thought about the same event in different ways. A birthday party where I was both happy and sad. A test I both passed and failed. My mother's face, which I couldn't quite remember, looking both young and old at the same time. The hollower hesitated, confused by these contradictory thoughts. That's when I pushed deeper, forcing it to confront the greatest contradiction of all. I made myself believe I was both, Laura Mercer and the hollower itself. The room began to shake. The crystals in the circle glowed with a light that hurt my eyes. The dust creature writhed and twisted, trying to maintain its form. Suddenly, I wasn't in the mining office anymore. I was in Salvation as it had been in 1932. People walked the streets in panic. I could feel their fear as if it were my own. Among them walked a figure made of swirling dust, touching one person after another, leaving empty clothes behind. I saw Dr. Harrison arrive decades later, excited about his discovery. I felt his growing horror as he realized what was happening. I experienced his final moments as the hollower consumed him. I was everyone the hollower had ever taken. Their memories flooded through me, thousands of lives, thousands of experiences, all at once. Too much for any human mind to bear, I screamed, and the sound seemed to crack the world around me. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of the mining office. The circle of crystals had melted together into one large formation. Inside, I could see swirling dust trapped like a fly in amber. It worked. The contradictions had confused the hollower enough that when it tried to rebuild itself, it couldn't maintain its form. It had crystallized itself into a prison of its own making. Samuel found me there hours later, barely conscious. He helped me pack my things and get to his truck. "Will it stay trapped?" I asked as we drove away from Salvation. "For a time," he said. "Not forever. Nothing holds it forever." It's been 6 months since I left Salvation. I submitted my findings to the Geological Survey Office. They were fascinated by the crystal formations I brought back, but dismissed my fanciful explanations of their origin. Just another crazy rock hunter who spent too much time alone in the desert, they think. I've taken a position at a research facility near Phoenix. We study unusual mineral formations. My boss was particularly interested in the large crystal formation I brought from Salvation, the one that trapped the hollower. He keeps it in a special display case in his office. Sometimes, when no one is looking, the dust inside seems to move. Yesterday, I found myself in the break room, talking to a colleague about growing up in a small mining town. I told him about my father working the silver mines, about the general store where my mother bought me candy every Friday. I stopped mid-sentence, cold fear washing over me. My father was a college professor. My mother was a librarian. I grew up in Seattle. Those weren't my memories. Last night, I dreamed of my boss opening the crystal display case, curious about the movement inside. I dreamed of dust spilling out, forming a shape that touched him gently on the forehead. This morning, he asked me about Salvation. He's never been there, but somehow he knew its name. He knew about the silver mines. He knew things he couldn't possibly know. I should leave this place. I should run as far as I can. But I know it wouldn't matter. Part of the hollower is still inside me, little pieces it left behind like seeds, and it's growing again, feeding on the memories of my colleagues, building itself back, one stolen thought at a time. The dust is gathering. And this time, I don't think I can stop it. My name is Evelyn Foster, and I used to be someone people respected, a wildlife photographer whose work showed up in magazines and museums. That was before everything fell apart. I'm sure you've heard the story, how I got caught staging those nature shots. The wolf pack that looked too perfect, the bear cubs posed just right. It didn't take long for someone to notice the same markings on animals that shouldn't have been in the same place. Just like that, 15 years of work meant nothing. That's why I came to my uncle's cabin on Echo Ridge. No one asks questions here. The cabin sits alone on this mountain, an old wooden place with a solid foundation and too many drafty windows. Uncle Jim left it to me when he died last year, though I never thought I'd actually use it. The locals call this place Echo Ridge because sounds bounce around in strange ways. Your voice might come back to you from a direction you weren't expecting, or sometimes it comes back different than how you said it. At first, I thought it was just mountain superstition. I'm going to do it right this time, I told myself as I set up my darkroom in the basement. The chemical smell reminded me of college. Before everything got complicated, I hung blackout curtains and arranged my equipment just so. This would be my fresh start. For the first week, I hiked every day, making maps of the area. I marked the best spots for my trail cameras, places where animals would have to pass through. I set up 12 cameras in a 5-mile radius around the cabin. They would snap pictures whenever something moved nearby. No more staged photos. This time, everything would be real. When I went into town for supplies, I met Walter Harmon, who runs the only general store around. He's a big man with hands like baseball mitts and a beard that's more gray than brown. "You're Jim's niece," he said. It wasn't a question. "Staying up at the old place?" "Just for a while," I told him. "Maybe through winter." Walter stopped stacking. "Cans. Folks don't usually stay up there past autumn," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Things get strange in the hollow when winter comes." I laughed it off. City girl not taking local warnings seriously. I know how that sounds now. Back at the cabin, I found a bookshelf I hadn't really looked at before. Uncle Jim had collected local stories and legends, all carefully organized in binders and journals. I flipped through them that evening, finding dozens of handwritten accounts about something called the Whispering Man. The stories didn't agree on much, except that it was tall and thin, and knew things it shouldn't. My first batch of trail camera photos came in after 5 days. I brought the memory cards back to my cabin and downloaded them onto my laptop before heading to the darkroom. To develop the film backups I always keep. Most shots were normal. Deer, raccoons, a fox trotting down a game trail. But in the background of several photos, mostly taken at dusk, there was something else. A tall, thin shape standing between trees, too far away to make out clearly. I thought it might be a person, but something about the proportions felt wrong. The next day, I met Lillian Tucker when her dog wandered onto my property. She's maybe 75, with white hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seem to see right through you. "You must be Jim's niece," she said, whistling for her dog. "He spoke of you often." I didn't remember Uncle Jim ever mentioning her, but I nodded anyway. "The ridge has been quiet since Jim passed," she continued, looking past me toward the trees. "It's been waiting for someone new to listen." "Waiting?" I asked. Lillian's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There are things in these woods that know your name without being told, Miss Foster. Best remember that." Before I could ask what she meant, she was already walking away, her dog trotting at her heels. That night, the weather changed. Patches of fog rolled in, but they didn't move like normal fog. They seemed to crawl between trees, sometimes stopping completely before changing direction. I watched from my porch, the hairs on my arms standing up despite the warm evening. Fell asleep reading Uncle Jim's journals, but woke suddenly around 3 a.m. Someone was calling my name. The voice sounded exactly like my mother's. coming from somewhere in the trees behind the cabin. "Evelyn, honey, come help me. I'm lost." I sat up, heart pounding. My mother died 6 years ago from cancer. I got up and looked out the window. The fog had grown thicker and the forest was just a wall of grey. But even though I couldn't see anything, I could still hear her voice, calling me by the nickname only she ever used. "Evie Bird, please. I can't find my way." I pressed my hands over my ears and sat on the floor until morning came. When the sun rose, the fog was gone and so was the voice. I told myself it was just a dream, mixed with the strange acoustics of Echo Ridge. But deep down, I knew. Something out there had spoken with my dead mother's voice, and somehow it had known exactly what would make me listen. The morning after, hearing my dead mother's voice, I hiked out to check my trail cameras. I needed normal, real things to focus on. The forest seemed ordinary in daylight, birds singing, squirrels chattering. But something felt off, like eyes watching from every shadow. I found my first camera right where I'd left it, but the second one was ruined. Someone or something had twisted the metal frame and ripped into the casing. The plastic was cracked, and the memory card was gone. But the weird thing was the film backup. Most of it was exposed to light, ruined. But one frame remained intact. Back in my darkroom, I developed that single frame with shaking hands. The image made my stomach drop. It showed a figure standing about 30 feet from the camera. It was impossibly tall and thin, with limbs too long to be human. But worst of all was its head, shaped like a wolf's or dog's, but stretched and wrong. I told myself it had to be a prank. Some local kid in a costume, trying to scare the city woman. But deep down, I didn't believe that. The next day, I drove to the local library and historical society. A grey-haired woman named Mrs. Jenkins helped me search through their records. "I'm looking for information about local legends," I said. "Specifically anything about a tall figure with a dog's head." Mrs. Jenkins went very still. "You mean the Dogman," she said quietly. "Why are you asking about that?" She showed me documents dating back to the 1800s. Settler accounts described a man with a wolf's face who could speak with stolen voices. Native American stories from the area mentioned a thief of sounds that lived in the mountains. When I got back to town, I stopped at Walter's store for supplies. When the last customer left, I worked up my courage. "Walter, can I ask you something?" "About the ridge." He glanced at the door, like he was making sure we were alone. "Depends what you're asking. Did something happen to your brother up there, on Echo Ridge?" Walter's face changed like a door slamming shut. "Who told you I had a brother?" "No one. I found an old photo in my uncle's things. It had your name on the back and another man who looked like you." Walter was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "My brother Daniel went hunting on Echo Ridge in 1976. He didn't come home for 3 weeks. When we found him, he was different." Walter's voice got lower. "Couldn't speak. Doctor said his vocal cords had been removed, cut out, clean as a surgeon would do it. I felt cold all over. What happened to him? Died 2 years later, never wrote down what happened to him, just drew pictures of a tall man with a dog's head." Walter looked me straight in the eyes. "You should leave that ridge before the first snow, Miss Foster." Back at the cabin, I tried to work on my photos, but I couldn't stop thinking about what Walter had said. I set up some audio recording equipment around the property, high-quality microphones that could catch even the softest sounds. I told myself it was for recording wildlife. 3 days later, when I checked the recordings, I heard it, whispers. At first, they were too quiet to make out, but when I boosted the volume and filtered out the background noise, I could hear words. Evelyn, photographer, mother died, cancer, staged photos. The whispers knew things about me, personal things, things I hadn't told anyone here. The next day was cold and rainy. I stayed inside and finally decided to look through Uncle Jim's personal journal. I found it hidden under a loose floorboard, in his bedroom, wrapped in wax paper. The journal was filled with observations about something he called the entity. The last entry was dated 3 days before his accident, a fall from the ridge that killed him. It's getting closer, he'd written. The mimicry is perfect now. Yesterday it used Sarah's voice, my wife, dead 15 years. The locals know more than they say. This isn't the first time it's happened here. I spent hours comparing my uncle's handwriting to the notes in the folklore binders. Some of the older folklore accounts were in his handwriting, disguised to look aged. He'd been researching this thing for years. That night, reviewing my trail camera photos in order, I noticed something terrifying. The Dogman figure wasn't just randomly appearing. It was in the background of photos from weeks ago, barely visible at the edge of the frame. In later photos, it was closer to the camera. It was moving closer to my cabin, week by week. The next morning, I took some of my photos into town to get supplies for securing the cabin better. The cashier, a woman I'd chatted with several times before, looked at the photos I'd accidentally left on top of my basket. Her face went white. "Where did you take these?" she whispered. "Up on Echo Ridge, near my cabin," I said. She pushed my items across the counter, refusing to touch the photos, and made the sign of the cross over her chest. "We don't speak about what listens from the shadows," she said. "Those who listen too closely never come back right." As I drove back to the cabin, snow began to fall, the first snow of the season. It was only October, too early for snow in these parts. By the time I reached the ridge, the road behind me was already disappearing under a white blanket. I had a feeling it would be a long time before that road was clear again, and something on Echo Ridge was waiting for exactly that. The snow didn't stop. It fell for 3 days straight, piling up against the cabin walls. On the 4th day, the power went out. I sat in the dark that first night, listening to the wind howl outside. I had flashlights and lanterns, but the batteries wouldn't last forever. Oddly, I noticed the flashlight would flicker and die when I was quiet, but it would glow steady when I talked out loud, like it was responding to my voice. "This is ridiculous," I said to myself. The moment I spoke, the light strengthened. I set up candles in the living room and kitchen. The dark room in the basement was the only place I felt halfway safe now. Maybe because it was underground, or maybe because it was a room designed to control light and sound. On my 6th day without power, I went to develop some film I'd taken of the snow-covered forest. I hadn't seen anything strange while taking the pictures, but I wanted something normal to do. I hung the film to dry and began the process of developing the prints. As I worked in the safe red light, something impossible happened. Pictures started appearing in my developing trays without me putting any paper in. I stood frozen, watching as an image slowly formed in the chemicals. It was my bedroom, with me in it, sleeping. The photo was taken from the corner of my room, from a place where no camera had been. My hands shook as I lifted the print. Then another began to form. This one showed me in the kitchen the day before, washing dishes. Another showed me reading by candlelight. Someone, something, had been inside my cabin taking pictures of me. I ran upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom, the only room without windows. I sat there for hours, trying to convince myself I had imagined it. But the photos were real. I'd left them drying in the basement. That night, I woke to a scratching sound outside. I looked out my bedroom window, and there it was. The Dogman, standing in my yard, over 7 feet tall. Its head was a wolf's, but wrong somehow. The snout too long, the eyes too forward-facing. Its body was like a man's, but stretched out, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its fingers ended in claws as long as kitchen knives. It stood perfectly still, staring at my window. Then it tilted back its head and made a sound. "Evie Bird, please let me in. I'm so cold out here." My mother's voice, perfect in every way, the slight southern accent, the way she said my nickname, but it came from that thing's mouth. I stumbled. back from the window and knocked over a lamp. The crash seemed to echo forever. Then I heard other sounds. Footsteps circling the cabin, scratching at different windows, trying doorknobs. By morning I was huddled in my closet with a baseball bat. When sunlight finally came, I forced myself to check every room. The doors were still locked, the windows unbroken. But outside, giant footprints circled the entire cabin, and deep scratches marked every door and window. I spent that day searching through Uncle Jim's research again. In a hidden compartment in his desk, I found an old tape recorder with a cassette inside. I found batteries and pressed play. October 15th, 1983, my uncle's voice said, "I've confirmed the creature uses sound waves to create illusions and disorientation. It can project voices with perfect clarity, mimicking anyone it's heard. But it needs materials to expand its range." His voice shook. "I found what was left of the Miller boy yesterday. The vocal cords were removed with surgical precision. This is how it collects new voices, new sounds." I shut off the tape, feeling sick. This was real, all of it. The storm worsened that night. The wind screamed around the eaves of the cabin, snow piling higher against the doors. I knew I was trapped. The road down the mountain would be impassable now. In desperation, I tried the emergency radio I'd found in Uncle Jim's things. I turned the dial, searching for any frequency with human voices. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is Evelyn Foster on Echo Ridge. I need help." Static answered me at first. Then voices began to come through, dozens of them, all talking at once, begging for help. Men, women, children, all crying out from the radio, "Please, someone help me. It knows my voice now. Don't let it in. It looks like my brother, but it's not him." I recognized one voice, Walter's brother, who'd lost his vocal cords. But how could his voice be on the radio if he'd lost his ability to speak? That's when I understood. These weren't real radio transmissions. The Dogman was projecting these voices, showing me its collection. All the people it had harvested over the years. That night, it began its siege. As darkness fell, the creature surrounded my cabin. Sometimes it would be silent for hours. Then suddenly, it would mimic someone I knew, my photographer friend Diane, begging me to open the door, my father saying he'd come to take me home, even my old college boyfriend calling my name. Each voice was perfect, the exact tone, the exact way they spoke. And all night long they called to me, begged me, threatened me. The Dogman was using everything it knew about me to break down my resistance. By morning, I was exhausted. As the pale winter sun rose, I checked outside. Fresh tracks led away into the forest, but I knew it would be back. I found another note in Uncle Jim's journal that made my blood run cold. It feeds on emotions, fear, hope, despair. It creates situations that maximize these feelings, harvesting the emotional energy before it harvests the physical voice. This is why it plays with its victims, sometimes for weeks. The emotional food must be consumed before the physical. The creature wasn't just trying to get in. It was feeding on my terror every night, growing stronger with each scream, each racing heartbeat, each moment of panic. And I'd been giving it exactly what it wanted. One morning, about 2 weeks after the first snowfall, I was flipping through my photo albums from home. I needed to see normal things, happy memories, pictures of my family vacations, college friends, my first photography award. But something was wrong. The photos were changing. In a beach photo from 5 years ago, a tall shadow stood in the background, where I knew nothing had been. In my college graduation picture, one of my friends' faces was blurred, with what looked like a long snout forming. I frantically flipped through the album. Every few pages, another photo had changed. My family Christmas card now showed the Dogman standing behind my mother. My award ceremony photo showed a clawed hand resting on my shoulder. "This isn't possible," I whispered, my voice shaking. "These are old photos. They can't change." But they had, and they were continuing to change as I watched. The Dogman was erasing my real memories and replacing them with itself. I threw the album into the fireplace and watched it burn, but I couldn't burn the images from my mind. That afternoon I heard my own voice calling from the forest. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice, perfectly mimicked, sounded confused and afraid. I stayed inside, but the voice kept talking, having a one-sided conversation as if speaking to someone else. "I don't understand what's happening to me," my voice said. "I keep seeing things that can't be real. Maybe I'm losing my mind." It was saying everything I'd been thinking. The Dogman wasn't just stealing voices, it was somehow reading my thoughts. Searched the cabin again, looking for anything that might help. In the basement behind the old coal furnace, I found a hidden door. It led to a small room Uncle Jim had kept secret. The walls were covered with drawings of the Dogman, charts tracking its movements, maps of the ridge with red X's marked at specific spots. On the table sat a strange device, metal rods arranged in a circle with wires connecting them to what looked like an old radio. Uncle Jim had been trying to communicate with the creature, not just study it, talk to it. His journal explained his theory. The Dogman used sound waves not just to mimic voices, but to project false images. It could create hallucinations through sound vibrations. That's why the Echo Ridge had such strange acoustics. The creature had been manipulating them for years. I found journals dating back to the 1930s, passed down from whatever researcher had come before Uncle Jim. They described how the Dogman grew stronger with each victim, absorbing not just their voices, but their memories and traits. "The entity has existed here for centuries," one entry read. "It begins as a mimic, becomes a thief, and finally a replacement." A replacement. The word chilled me to the bone. That night, the worst storm yet hit the ridge. Wind howled so loudly, it seemed to shake the cabin's foundation. I huddled in the living room, feeding the fire to stay warm. A tremendous crash came from my bedroom. I grabbed my baseball bat and flashlight and slowly pushed the door open. The window had shattered. Inward snow and ice covering my bed. And on my pillow lay something wet and red, a human vocal cord, freshly cut, still dripping. I slammed the door and ran to the bathroom, throwing up until there was nothing left in my stomach. It was leaving me gifts now. The next day, I found a hidden compartment in the floorboards containing Uncle Jim's final writings. "I figured it out too late," he wrote. "The Dogman tried to reach town last winter. Too many people, too many voices to steal. I have to stop it. I know how it works now. It needs anchors, people who hear it first, who connect with it. I am the anchor now. If I remove myself, it will be contained again, at least for a time. May God forgive me for what I must do." Uncle Jim hadn't fallen accidentally from the ridge. He had jumped. He had sacrificed himself to stop the creature from reaching the town below. That night, I watched in horror as my voice recorder turned, itself on and off. The radio spun through stations without me touching it. My camera clicked and whirred, taking photos with no one behind the lens. The Dogman could control my equipment now. It was showing me its power. I couldn't take it anymore. I stuffed warm clothes into a backpack, grabbed a flashlight and my emergency radio, and decided to try escaping while there was still daylight. The snow was deep, past my knees in some places. I followed what I thought was the path down the mountain, the same one I'd used dozens of times before. But after an hour of walking, I realized something was wrong. The trees looked familiar, too familiar. I came into a clearing and saw my own footprints ahead of me, making a circle. I'd been walking in a giant loop. I tried another path, then another. Each one led me back to the same clearing. The forest had changed, or the Dogman was making me think it had changed. As the sun began to set, I saw it waiting for me in the clearing. 7 feet tall, standing perfectly still, its wolf head tilted slightly as if curious. "You can't leave, Evie Bird," it said in my mother's voice. No one ever leaves Echo Ridge in winter. I ran blindly, crashing through branches and underbrush until I somehow found my way back to the cabin. I locked every door and window, pushed furniture against them. That night, sitting in front of the fire, I realized something even more terrifying. Some of the voices I'd been hearing, the emergency radio transmissions, even some of my memories of conversations in town, might never have happened at all. The dogman hadn't just been stalking me. It had been changing my perception of reality itself, little by little, day by day. How much of what I remembered was real, and how much was its manipulation. I couldn't trust my own mind anymore, and that's exactly what it wanted. I was running, out of options. The dogman was getting stronger, and I was getting weaker. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard voices or scratching at the windows. I remembered something from Uncle Jim's notes about sound being the creature's power. If sound was how it controlled things, maybe a place without sound would be safe. The root cellar under the kitchen was small and cold, but it had thick walls of packed earth. I gathered blankets, food, water, and my flashlight and turned it into what Uncle Jim's notes called an anechoic chamber, a place where sound doesn't echo. I lined the walls with every blanket and pillow I could find. I stuffed rags into the cracks around the door. When I sat in the middle of this makeshift chamber, the silence was complete. For the first time in weeks, I couldn't hear the dogman's voices. I slept there that night, really slept, without dreams or voices waking me. When I climbed out the next morning, I felt clearer, like my head had been foggy for weeks, and now I could think again. A knock at the door nearly made my heart stop. I grabbed my baseball bat and inched toward the window to peek out. It was Lillian. Tucker, the old woman I'd met months ago. She stood on my porch, looking calm despite the snow and cold. "Miss Foster," she called, "I need to speak with you." I didn't want to open the door. How did I know it was really her? "How did you get up here?" I called through the door. "The road's been blocked for weeks." "There are paths known only to those who've lived here all their lives," she said. "Please, let me in. The cold is bitter today." I cracked the door open, keeping the chain on. Lillian looked the same as before, white hair in a tight bun, sharp eyes that missed nothing. "How do I know you're real?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "You don't. But if I were the thing you fear, I'd already be inside." I let her in, keeping my bat close. She didn't comment on the furniture pushed against windows or the symbols I'd drawn on the walls from Uncle Jim's notes. "I've been watching this ridge for 50 years, she said, settling into a chair by the fire. "My mother watched it before me, and her mother before that. We're the guardians." Guardians of what? Of the boundary. The thing out there, it's been here longer than any of us. My people, the Shawnee, called it man with wolf's hunger. The settlers called it the dogman. Every generation it grows stronger, but it needs anchors to reach beyond the ridge. Anchors, I repeated. "That's what Uncle Jim called them too." Lillian nodded. "Your uncle understood at the end. When someone new comes to the ridge, the creature attaches itself to them. It learns them, their voices, their memories. Then it can spread." "How do we stop it?" I asked. "It has a weakness," Lillian said. "It cannot mimic what it hasn't experienced. It can't create a voice it hasn't heard. Can't project an image it hasn't seen." We spent the day setting up defenses. I used my photography equipment to create a strobe light system that Lillian said would disrupt the creature's projections. We made recordings of sounds the dogman had never heard, strange electronic tones, from my synthesizer equipment. As dusk approached, Lillian went to gather herbs from her bag that she said would help protect us. I watched her walk to the kitchen. Then I heard Lillian's voice from outside on the porch. "Evelyn, don't trust who's inside. It's not me." I froze. Lillian was in my kitchen, but her voice was coming from outside. I grabbed my bat and backed against the wall. The Lillian in my kitchen came back in, looking concerned. "What's wrong?" she asked. "I heard your voice outside," I said, raising the bat. She looked sad. "It's starting. The creature is trying to make you doubt what's real." "Evelyn!" called the voice from outside. "That's not me in there. That's the Dogman." I couldn't tell which was real. Both sounded exactly like Lillian. Both acted like her. The one inside knew things about the creature that seemed helpful. But what if that was the trap? "Tell me something only the real Lillian would know," I demanded of the woman in my house. She thought for a moment. "When we first met, my dog had wandered onto your property. A black and white border collie named Max. I'd forgotten about the dog. It seemed right, but the Dogman could have taken that memory too." As I hesitated, the Lillian outside started pounding on the door. "Evelyn, please, it's wearing my face." I made a choice. I ran to the door and threw it open, ready to let the outside Lillian in. There was no one there, just swirling snow and darkness. I turned back to the Lillian in my living room. "How did you do that? There's no one out there, but I heard her. You clear as day." She smiled sadly. "I didn't do anything, it did. It's been replacing your real memories with false ones this whole time. It's been inside your head, changing what you think you know." A horrible realization washed over me. How do I know what's real anymore? "That's its greatest power," Lillian said, "and why it must be stopped." That night, we confronted the creature. Lillian showed me how to use Uncle Jim's device to create a sound barrier around the cabin. The Dogman appeared at the windows, shifting between forms, sometimes looking like my mother, sometimes like Uncle Jim, sometimes like its true self. "You cannot keep me out," it said, its voice changing mid-sentence from my mother's to Walter's, to mine. "I'm already inside." It was right. As we fought to keep it out, I realized what was happening. I had flashes of memories that didn't fit. Times when I'd blacked out over the past weeks, things I'd done but couldn't remember. "It wants complete identity absorption," Lillian explained as we huddled in the root cellar. "Not just to mimic us, but to become us." Using Lillian's knowledge and Uncle Jim's devices, we managed to wound the creature that night. The strobe lights disrupted its projections, and the strange sounds we played seemed to hurt it physically. It retreated into the forest, howling, with dozens of different voices. Winter finally broke in, late March. The snow melted enough that the road down the mountain was passable again. Lillian had stayed with me through the worst of it, teaching me how to detect the creature's influence and resist it. As I packed my car to leave Echo Ridge forever, I gathered all my photographs and equipment. I would show the world what I had discovered. I had evidence now. Pictures of the Dogman, recordings of impossible voices, Uncle Jim's research. But when I developed the final batch of film, every picture showed only normal forest scenes. When I checked my digital files, the strange images were gone, replaced with ordinary photos of trees, rocks, and wildlife. "No, no, no," I whispered, searching frantically through my memory cards. "They were here. I know they were here." Lillian watched me from the porch. "The creature has been erasing itself," she said, "covering its tracks." I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. As I looked up at the mirror, I saw something that made my blood freeze. For just a second, just a brief flicker, my reflection changed. My face morphed into a canine snout, then back to normal. I backed away from the mirror, heart pounding. Had I really seen it? Or was my mind playing tricks after months of stress? Then I heard a whisper, so quiet I almost missed it. My voice, but not coming from my mouth. "We are going home together, Evie Bird." The Dogman hadn't just been hunting me. It had already begun to become me. As I drove down the mountain away from Echo Ridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was taking something with me, something that had been waiting all winter for this exact moment, for its chance to leave the ridge. My name is Marcus Thorne. I came to the northern woods of Minnesota to get away from everything. After Vietnam, being around people just didn't feel right anymore. The sounds of the city made me jump. The questions in people's eyes when they looked at me were too much. So I bought this cabin, 30 miles from the nearest town, with some of my army pay. When I first saw it, the cabin was a mess. The roof leaked in 3 places, the porch sagged like an old man's shoulders, and mice had chewed through most of the furniture. But that was okay. I needed something to do with my hands, besides clench them into fists every time a car backfired. All summer, I worked on fixing up the place. I replaced rotted boards, patched the roof, and built new shelves along the walls. Each day of work made me feel a little more like a person again and less like the ghost I'd become after the war. I learned to hunt and fish to feed myself. Setting traps in the forest became my new routine. Out here, the night sounds were different. No sirens, no shouting neighbors, just owls and the wind through pine trees. For the first time since coming home, I could sleep for more than an hour without waking up in a cold sweat. One day, while checking my fishing lines at the lake, I met Raymond Blackhawk. He was an old Ojibwe man with deep wrinkles around his eyes. That bunched up when he smiled. He knew every inch of these woods and showed me which berries I could eat and which mushrooms to avoid. "Winter comes early up here," Raymond warned me one evening as we sat on my newly fixed porch. "Not like down south. It's a living thing, the winter. It breathes. It hunts." I nodded politely, but didn't really understand what he meant. Raymond looked at me with serious eyes. "There are stories about these woods, about the Wendigo." "What's that?" I asked, not really caring, but wanting to be nice. "A spirit of hunger, grows stronger as winter gets deeper, comes for the lonely ones." Raymond's voice dropped lower. "Makes them hunger for things they shouldn't." I smiled and passed him another cup of coffee. I'd heard enough ghost stories in army barracks to last a lifetime. "Thanks for the warning," I said, not believing a word. Over the next few weeks, I explored more of the forest around my cabin. About a mile west, I found some old trappers' shelters, long abandoned. They looked like they might be useful for storing firewood. Under my own cabin, I discovered a root cellar I hadn't noticed before. Down there, tucked in a corner behind some empty preserve jars, was a wooden box. Inside were old journals from 1943. I thought about reading them right away, but decided to save them for winter when I'd be stuck inside anyway. When fall came, I started noticing strange things. A rabbit hopped right into my cabin one morning when I opened the door. Birds kept flying into my windows, even though the glass was dirty enough they should have seen it. All the animals seemed jumpy, scared of something. The first snow fell in early October, weeks earlier than Raymond said was normal. The morning after, I found weird footprints circling my cabin, long and narrow, like nothing I'd ever seen before. Raymond came by that afternoon, his old truck somehow making it through the fresh snow. He brought me extra supplies and looked worried when I showed him the tracks. "I can't come back until spring thaw now," he said, handing me a small leather pouch on a string. "Keep this with you." "What is it?" I asked, turning the little bundle in my hands. "Medicine, protection." His eyes were dead serious. "Promise me you'll keep it close." I promised, though I didn't believe in such things. After he left, I hung the pouch on a nail by the door, not wanting to hurt his feelings by throwing it away. That night, as the wind picked up and more snow began to fall, I could have sworn I heard something moving around outside. Something big, something that wasn't afraid of the cold. I told myself it was just the wind. I was wrong. 3 days after Raymond left, the worst blizzard I'd ever seen hit. The snow piled so high it covered my windows. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and somewhere in that howling, my radio antenna snapped clean off. Just like that, I was cut off from everyone. I tried not to worry. I had enough food stored up, plenty of firewood. I told myself I'd be fine. But then the dream started. Every night I'd close my eyes and find myself back in Vietnam. I could smell the wet jungle and feel the sticky heat on my skin. But when I looked up, the sky wasn't jungle sky. It was filled with swirling snow. My army buddies walked through snowdrifts instead of rice paddies, and something was always following us. Something tall and thin that moved behind the trees. I'd wake up shaking, the cabin freezing cold, even with the fire still burning in the stove. One morning I decided to check my traps. Maybe catching something fresh would make me feel better. I put on my thickest clothes and pushed through the snow to where I'd set traps a quarter-mile from the cabin. All 6 traps were empty. But that wasn't the strange part. Each trap was covered in ice. Not normal ice, but ice that curved upward in thin spikes, like fingers reaching for the sky. I touched one, and it broke with a sound like a whisper. On my way back, I heard something that made my blood freeze colder than the air. Voices, calling my name. Marcus, help us. It sounded like Pete Johnson, who stepped on a mine right in front of me near Da Nang. Over here, Marcus. That was definitely Ramirez, who bled out, in my arms during an ambush, but they couldn't be here. They were dead. I knew they were dead. I ran back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My heart beat so hard, I thought it might break my ribs. Days passed. I couldn't find any animals in the woods, not even tracks. It was like they'd all just disappeared. I started eating from my canned goods, watching the pile get smaller each day. Strange things kept happening. Sometimes I'd find myself standing in the snow, not remembering how I got outside. Once, I came to my senses at the edge of the woods, barefoot, with no memory of leaving my bed. My feet should have been frozen, but they weren't even cold. One night when I couldn't sleep, I remembered the journals in the wooden box. I dug them out and started reading by lantern light. The journals belonged to a man named Frank Wilkins. He bought the cabin in 1943 to get away from the world after he was deemed unfit for service in the war. His handwriting was neat at first, talking about fixing up the place, hunting, fishing, just like me, but as winter came in his stories, the writing changed, got messier. He wrote about hearing voices in the wind, about finding his traps empty but covered in strange ice, about losing time. The last few entries scared me the most. It speaks with many voices, he wrote. People I used to know. It bends. Time like a reed. Yesterday I watched the sun rise 3 times without night falling. It's playing with me. The final entry just said, it's hungry, so hungry, and now I am too. After that, nothing. Frank Wilkins just walked into the forest one day, according to a note someone else added to the back page. They never found him. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The cabin suddenly felt too quiet, too dark. That night, I woke up with the taste of blood in my mouth. I turned on my flashlight and found myself sitting on the kitchen floor, gnawing on a chunk of frozen venison I didn't remember taking from my food store. The meat was rock hard and completely raw. I spat it out, horrified. What was happening to me? As I stood up, something caught my eye. Raymond's medicine pouch, still hanging by the door, was moving, swinging back and forth like someone had just bumped it. But there was no breeze, no open door, nothing to make it move. I watched, frozen in place, as the little leather bag slowly turned until it pointed to the east wall of the cabin, toward the densest part of the forest, where the whispers seemed strongest. My mouth went dry. I wasn't alone anymore. Something was out there, and it knew I was here. I couldn't sleep after finding myself eating raw meat. Something was very wrong with me, with this place. I kept thinking about the missing animals. Where had they all gone? When? Morning came. I decided to follow the direction Raymond's medicine pouch had pointed. I didn't believe in magic, but I had nothing else to go on. I put on my warmest clothes, grabbed my rifle, and headed east into the dense forest. The snow was deep, coming up to my knees in some places. The cold bit at my face, but I kept going. I had to know what was out here. After walking for almost 2 hours, I noticed something strange. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling branches, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of snow under my boots. Then I smelled it, a horrible smell, like rotten meat and wet fur. I followed the smell to a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. In the middle of the clearing was what I can only call a bone garden. Dozens of animal carcasses, deer, rabbits, foxes, even a few bears, arranged in a perfect circle. Some were fresh, some were just bones. All were picked clean in the same strange way, like something had sucked the meat right off them without tearing the skin. In the center of the circle was a pile of antlers, all pointing up like fingers reaching for the sky. My stomach turned over. No normal predator would do this, no person either. I backed away slowly, trying not to make a sound. I needed to get back to the cabin, to safety. That's when I heard it. A sound like branches breaking, but too rhythmic, too deliberate. Like footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too long between each step, like whatever was walking had legs much longer than mine. I turned and ran. The sound followed me, getting closer. I didn't look back, I couldn't. But I could feel something behind me, something tall that moved too fast for its size. Just as I reached a clearing, I felt cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, raising my rifle. Nothing was there, just the trees and snow. But then I saw it, standing between two pines about 50 yards away. It was shaped like a person, but all wrong. It stood maybe 15 feet tall, with arms and legs like tree branches. Too long, too thin. Its body was just skin stretched over bones, like it was starving to death. And on its head were antlers, huge ones, like nothing I'd ever seen on any deer. Its face, I'll never forget its face. Eyes like cloudy ice, a mouth that opened too wide, with teeth like icicles. It didn't move toward me, it didn't have to, because suddenly it was just gone. And then it was standing 20 feet closer. I hadn't seen it move. It was like time. Skipped. I fired my rifle. The bullet hit it square in the chest. It should have dropped. It smiled at me. A horrible, too wide smile. I ran again, harder than I've ever run in my life. The trees around me seemed to blur and stretch. Sometimes I'd pass the same fallen log 3 times, like I was running in circles, even though I kept going straight. When I finally saw my cabin, I nearly cried with relief. I burst through the door and slammed it shut, sliding the heavy wooden bar into place. For hours, I sat with my back against the door, rifle in my hands, waiting, listening. The thing didn't come. But as night fell, I heard Raymond's voice outside. "Marcus, you in there? I got stuck in the snow coming back to check on you. Please, I'm freezing out here." It sounded exactly like Raymond, but I knew it couldn't be him. The road was completely snowed in. There was no way he could have made it back. "Marcus, please," the voice begged. "My fingers are turning blue. I just need to warm up." I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear it. After a while, the voice changed. "Help me, Marcus," said Pete Johnson's voice. Then Ramirez. Then my father, who died when I was 15. All night the voices kept changing, calling to me, and all night I sat there shaking, knowing that if I opened that door I'd never close it again. When morning finally came, the voices stopped. I looked out the window. In the fresh snow were those strange long footprints circling my cabin over and over, and hanging from a tree branch right in front of my window was a dead rabbit, its body twisted into an impossible shape. A gift. It had left me a gift. I closed the curtains and sank to the floor. The thing, the Wendigo, was playing with me, and I had no idea how to make it stop. Days passed, maybe weeks. I lost track of time. The Wendigo kept leaving gifts outside my door. Animal parts, bones arranged in patterns. Once something that looked like a human finger, though I told myself it couldn't be. I stayed inside, watching my food supplies get lower and lower. The strange thing was, I didn't feel hungry anymore. Not for food, anyway. There was a different kind of hunger growing in me. A cold, empty feeling that food couldn't fix. One night, I woke up to find my cabin had changed. The walls didn't meet right at the corners. The hallway to my bedroom seemed longer than it should be. When I walked down it, it kept stretching, like I would never reach the end. I blinked, and suddenly I was back in bed. Had I dreamed it? I wasn't sure anymore what was real and what wasn't. I went back to the journals, reading them over and over, looking for anything that might help me. That's when I found it. A hidden page tucked into the binding. Frank Wilkins had written one last entry. The Wendigo isn't just a monster. It's hunger itself. It doesn't just want to eat you, it wants to become you. It feeds on what's empty inside you, on guilt, on loneliness. If you have enough darkness in you, you can trap it there. But the price is becoming like it. God help me, I'm going to try. I sat back, thinking hard. The Wendigo was feeding on my guilt about Vietnam, about the men I couldn't save, the things I did to survive. That's why it could sound like them. It was using my own memories against me. That night, something even stranger happened. I got up to add wood to the stove and found myself standing in the snow outside instead. I wasn't cold. I hadn't put on a coat. But somehow, I was outside my cabin, staring at the dark trees. My body didn't feel like my own anymore. My fingers seemed longer than they should be. When I finally made it back inside and looked in my small mirror, my eyes looked different, paler, hungrier. The next morning, I tried to fix a loose board on my window. When I hammered the nail, red liquid oozed out around it like the wood was bleeding. I dropped the hammer and backed away. The cabin was changing, or maybe I was. I remembered Raymond's medicine bundle and took it down from the nail by the door. Inside the leather pouch was a small carved stone, some dried herbs, and a folded piece of paper with strange symbols drawn on it. Instructions. The symbols didn't make any sense to me, but somehow I knew what they meant. It was a ritual, a way, to face the Wendigo. To trap it maybe, like Frank had tried to do, but there was a cost. To perform the ritual, I would have to relive my worst memory from Vietnam. The ambush where I lost half my squad. I would have to feel it all again. The fear, the guilt, the horror. I would have to offer up my pain as a meal to the Wendigo. Could I do that? Did I have any other choice? That night, the forest seemed to come alive. I watched through my window as trees bent and swayed without any wind. Their branches reached toward my cabin like hands trying to grab it. I knew then that I couldn't wait any longer. The Wendigo was getting stronger, and something was happening to me too. I set up the ritual like the instructions showed. I placed the carved stone in the middle of the floor. I burned the dried herbs in a small metal bowl. The smell filled the cabin, bitter and sharp, but somehow familiar. I sat cross-legged on the floor and closed my eyes. I forced myself to remember that terrible day in the jungle, the sounds of gunfire, the screams of my friends, the smell of blood and smoke. As the memory took over, the cabin around me started to change. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in Minnesota anymore. The wooden walls had become dense jungle. The floor was mud and leaves. And my friends, my dead friends, were there with me, looking just like they had that day. You left us, they said, but it wasn't their voices. It was something speaking through them, something ancient and hungry. The air in front of me shimmered and twisted. The Wendigo stepped out of nothing, taller than my ceiling should have allowed. But we weren't in my cabin anymore. We were somewhere else, somewhere between. I've been eating your guilt for weeks, it said, its voice like cracking ice. Parts of you are already mine. And that's when I realized the horrible truth. The Wendigo hadn't been hunting me. It had been turning me into one of them. I fell backwards, scrambling away from the Wendigo. Its long fingers reached for me, almost gently, like it was trying to comfort me. You're becoming like me, it said. You've been alone too long, hungry too long. No, I whispered. I'm not like you. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong with me. I hadn't felt cold in Days. I hadn't felt hungry either, not for food. And sometimes, when I looked at my hands, they didn't look like my hands anymore. Just then, the door of my cabin burst open. The real door, not the jungle vision I was trapped in. The freezing winter air rushed in, and with it came Raymond Blackhawk. He looked older, harder than when I'd last seen him. In his hands was a staff decorated with feathers and small bones. "Step away from him," Raymond said to the Wendigo, his voice strong and clear. The jungle vision faded. We were back in my cabin, though it still looked wrong. The walls too tall, the corners not meeting right. The Wendigo turned to Raymond and smiled its terrible smile. "You've hunted me for so long, old man. Will you ever give up?" "Not while I breathe," Raymond said. Then he looked at me. "It's not too late, Marcus. I should have told you everything from the start. The man who owned this cabin before you, Frank Wilkins, he didn't just disappear. He became a Wendigo." "What?" I couldn't understand. "The journal was a lure," Raymond said, not taking his eyes off the creature. "Frank became the thing he feared. He's been feeding on lonely souls ever since, drawing them here with tales that mirror their own." "The Wendigo," Frank laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Very good, old man, but you're too late for this one. He's already changing." Raymond moved toward me. "I've been hunting this thing since it took my family in 1957. Today we end it, Marcus. The winter solstice is now. It's when the Wendigo is strongest, but also when it can be destroyed." He handed me a small bundle of herbs. "Burn this. Say the words I taught you in the medicine bundle. We can still save you." The Wendigo moved faster than I could see, suddenly between us. "He won't help you, old man. He's mine now." But Raymond was ready. He began to chant in his native language, words I somehow understood, even though I'd never heard them before. The air in the cabin grew thick and heavy. The Wendigo screamed, a sound so high and cold it made my ears hurt. It lunged at Raymond, its long fingers reaching for his throat. I didn't think. I threw myself at the creature, burning herbs in my hand. I began to say the words from the medicine bundle, my voice joining Raymond's. The Wendigo turned on me, its face twisted in fury. "You cannot fight what you're becoming." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The Wendigo held us both in some space between seconds, forcing us to see our worst fears. I saw myself becoming the monster, hunting people through snowy woods for centuries. Raymond saw his family dying again over and over, but he didn't stop chanting. And neither did I. The Wendigo shrieked and grabbed Raymond. Before I could move, it had him in its grip. I watched in horror as Raymond's body seemed to wither, the life being sucked out of him. But even as he died, Raymond finished the chant. He looked at me one last time, his eyes clear and calm. "Run, Marcus, now, while it's weak." The Wendigo dropped Raymond's lifeless body. It staggered, suddenly looking less solid, like it was fading around the edges. I ran, out the door, through the snow, toward where I'd parked my truck months ago. I prayed it would still start. As I ran, I realized something strange. The snow was piled high, the air was freezing, but I couldn't feel it. I wasn't wearing a coat. My feet were in thin shoes, not boots. But I wasn't cold at all. I reached my truck and grabbed the door handle. In the reflection of the window, I saw my face. My eyes had turned milky white. My cheeks were hollow, my skin stretched tight over. My bones and my teeth had grown sharp. I stumbled back, horrified. Then I felt it, a hunger unlike anything I'd ever known. Not for food, for something else, something worse. I thought about the town 30 miles away. All those people. The hunger grew stronger. I got in my truck. Somehow, it started right away. As I drove down the snowy road, I tried to remember why I had been so afraid of the woods, why I had fought so hard against becoming what I was becoming. I couldn't remember anymore. All I knew was that I was hungry. So very hungry. And the town wasn't that far away. Behind me, in my rearview mirror, I could see my cabin growing smaller. For a second, I thought I saw Raymond standing on the porch, watching me go with sad eyes. But that couldn't be right. Raymond was dead. I was sure of that, almost as sure as I was that I would never be Marcus Thorne again. My name is Daniel Pierce. I used to think I could save the world, or at least a small part of it. That's why I started Harmony Grove. Now I know some places don't want to be saved. Some places want to do the saving or the taking themselves. It all began in 1992. I was tired of protests that went nowhere and big companies that kept cutting down trees no matter what we did. So I took my savings and found 11 other people who felt the same way. Together, we bought 200 acres of beautiful redwood forest in Northern California. The land was cheap because the timber company couldn't wait to get rid of it. They had stopped cutting trees there back in the 1970s. At the time, I thought we were lucky. Now I know they were the lucky ones. Our group was a good mix. We had Sarah, an engineer who knew how to build things, Mike, who could grow anything, Lisa, a doctor, Eliza, who studied plants, and others with different skills. We all wanted the same thing, to live simply and not harm the earth. We built small cabins, set up solar panels for power, dug composting toilets and planted gardens. Everything worked better than we expected. It felt like the forest wanted us there. Our vegetables grew faster and bigger than they should have. The sun seemed brighter in our valley. The air felt cleaner. One day, about 3 months after we moved in, I was walking through the forest when I found something strange. One of the biggest redwoods had a crack near its base. When I looked closer, I saw the inside was hollow. Not just a little hollow, but big enough for a person to stand inside. I squeezed through the crack and found myself in a dark space inside the tree. When my eyes adjusted, I saw weird symbols carved into the wood inside. They looked old, very old. They weren't in any language I knew, just strange shapes that somehow made me feel uneasy. Over the next few weeks, I found more hollow trees. They all had similar carvings inside. The strange thing was, when I marked their locations on a map, they formed a perfect circle around our settlement. One afternoon, a woman named Margaret Redhawk came to visit us. She said she was a historian from the local tribe. She looked around our community with a worried face. "You've settled in the dark valley," she said. "My people never lived here. Now I see why you got this land so cheap." When I asked what she meant, she just shook her head and promised to come back with more information. Before she left, she looked at our gardens with surprise. "Things grow too well here," she said. "That's not always good." She was right about the growth. Eliza, our plant expert, had been taking notes on our gardens. Plants were growing twice as fast as normal. Some were developing unusual features, extra leaves, strange colors, odd textures. Then Mike found something while digging a root cellar. At first, he thought they were animal bones, but they didn't look like any animal we knew. They were too big for deer, but shaped all wrong for bear. And they had weird, smooth spots, like something had been growing on them. Around this time, my dreams changed. I started seeing the forest in my sleep, but not from my own eyes. I was moving fast between trees, much faster than a person could run. Everything looked different, brighter, with colors I can't even describe. And I felt hungry in these dreams, not regular hungry, but a deep, ancient hunger that scared me. I didn't tell anyone about the dreams at first. I thought they were just stress. We had all been working hard after all, but each night the dreams got stronger, and each day I felt more and more like something in the forest was watching us, something that had been waiting a very long time. The night everything changed was during a new moon. The sky was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. I was sitting on my cabin porch, watching the edge of the forest where it met our clearing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a shadow moving between trees. But shadows don't move by themselves. It was huge, taller than any man I'd ever seen. It moved like it belonged among the redwoods, almost like it was part of the forest itself. Just for a second, I saw its outline against the night sky. Then it was gone. The next morning, I told the others what I'd seen. Most of them thought I was tired or seeing things, but Mike believed me. He suggested we set up trail cameras like hunters use to track deer. A week later, we had our proof. The pictures weren't clear, just blurry images of something big moving through the trees, but we could tell it stood nearly 10 feet tall, with arms too long for a human and a head that seemed the wrong shape. It could be a bear, Sarah said, but her voice shook. We all knew bears don't walk on two legs for that long, and they don't peek at people from behind trees. Then Jason went missing. Jason was our handyman, good with tools, and always fixing things around the community. He went to check a water pipe at the edge of our property one morning and didn't come back for dinner. We searched all night with flashlights, calling his name. No answer. The forest seemed bigger that night, darker. Paths I'd walked 100. Times suddenly felt unfamiliar. Twice I got turned around, ending up back where I started when I was sure I'd been walking straight. 2 days later, Jason walked into the main house during breakfast like nothing had happened. His clothes were dirty and torn. His eyes looked empty, like he wasn't really seeing us. "Where were you?" Lisa asked, checking him for injuries. "I was right here," he said. "I wasn't gone." But the strangest thing was the powder covering his skin and clothes. It was fine and grayish, like dust, but softer. Eliza took a sample to look at under her microscope. "It's some kind of fungus spore," she told us that night, "but not like any I've seen before. When I mixed it with some chemicals, it seemed to react like it has a nervous system." "Fungus doesn't have nerves," I said. "This one seems to..." She answered, not meeting my eyes. A few days later, Sarah noticed a rash on her arm. It wasn't like a normal rash. The red marks formed perfect straight lines and circles. By the next day, Mike had it too. Then Eliza. The patterns were all different, but all geometric, like someone had drawn them with a ruler. I went back to the hollow trees, spending a whole day mapping them. They weren't just in a circle. They formed a perfect star pattern across our whole valley, and I found more symbols carved inside each one. Some looked like the patterns on my friend's skin. People started acting different. Rachel would stand at the edge of the garden for hours, just staring into the trees. Tom stopped eating our regular food, instead gathering mushrooms from the forest that Lisa said weren't safe. But he ate them anyway and seemed fine. I started, staying up late, watching the woods. That's when I saw it again, and this time I wasn't the only one. The creature moved from tree to tree around our clearing, like it was checking on us, studying us. It would stand still for so long you might think it was just another redwood. Then it would move fast and smooth to another spot. One morning I decided to hike to the ridge above our valley, where I could see the whole property. But nothing looked right. Paths went in different directions than I remembered. A small pond had appeared where there was only dry ground before. A big boulder I used as a landmark was simply gone. It was like the forest was changing, moving things, when we weren't looking. When Margaret Redhawk returned, she brought an old leather book with her. She sat with me on my porch, looking down at our community as the sun set. "My ancestors called it the Tree Walker," she said, showing me drawings in the book that looked just like what we'd seen. "They say it shepherds a hunger that grows. That's why we never settled in this valley." "What does that mean?" I asked. She pointed to the dark spaces between the trees. "It means you didn't find this place. It found you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I felt the forest pressing in around us, watching, waiting. And in the distance, just at the edge of hearing, I thought I could make out the sound of something large moving through the trees, moving closer. The storm hit us hard that night. Rain hammered down on our cabin roofs, while wind bent the trees like they were made of rubber. I was helping Mike secure our solar panels when lightning flashed, lighting up the whole valley bright as day. That's when we both saw it, standing at the tree line, not even trying to hide anymore. It was massive, taller than I'd thought. Its head almost reaching the lowest branches of a young redwood. But what made my heart stop wasn't its size. It was what it looked like. Parts of it seemed human-shaped, with arms and legs and a head. But other parts weren't human at all. Its skin wasn't skin. It looked like wood in some places, rough and bark-like, and its back was covered in mushrooms and shelf fungi growing right out of it like it was a fallen log. "Run," I whispered to Mike, but neither of us moved. We couldn't. The thing raised one long arm, and the ground at our feet cracked open. Tree roots burst up through the dirt, writhing like snakes. Behind us, we heard a redwood groan as its trunk actually bent toward us, like it was reaching down. We finally broke free and ran back to the main house, where most of our group had gathered because of the storm. Everyone was talking once about things they'd seen in the forest, paths that changed, animals that behaved strangely. No one had wanted to be the first to say something was wrong. Then Jason walked in, and everyone went quiet. His skin had changed. It wasn't skin anymore, not really. It looked hard and cracked like tree bark. And his eyes, there was something growing out of them. Tiny mushroom-like growths sprouted from the corners, white and delicate. More grew from his mouth when he opened it to speak. "It's beautiful," he said, his voice sounding dry and scratchy. "What it wants, what it needs. You'll all see." Lisa tried to help him, to check his temperature or look at the growths, but he pushed her away with surprising strength. 3 others, Rachel, Tom, and Chris, moved to stand with Jason. Their skin hadn't changed as much, but they all had the same look in their eyes. Empty, but somehow satisfied. Eliza pulled me aside, her hands shaking as she showed me notes from her research. "It's a parasite," she whispered. "The spores we found on Jason, they're everywhere in the valley. In the soil, the water, the air. They get into your system and change things. They need human hosts, our neural tissue especially. But what is that thing outside?" I asked. "I think it's the first," she said, "or maybe just the oldest. And it's not alone. It's connected to everything in this valley. The trees, the fungi, even the infected people. They're all becoming part of one system." As if to prove her point, Jason and the others suddenly turned their heads at the exact same time, looking toward the east window. Outside, the creature did the same, all of them moving in perfect unison. That night, more of our friends changed. By morning, half the community had the bark-like skin and empty eyes. They still looked mostly human, but they moved differently, often in sync with each other. Sometimes they would all stop what they were doing and stare at nothing for minutes, then continue as if nothing had happened. The next day, the creature came closer. It stood at the edge of our garden, releasing clouds of spores from the fungi on its back. When the wind blew them toward us, those who breathed them in had the same vision, a vast network of roots and fungal threads connecting everything in the forest, with all of us as bright spots of energy waiting to be absorbed. We tried to radio for help, but our equipment stopped working. The infected people, we couldn't think of them as our friends anymore, seemed to know what we were doing. They would appear whenever we tried to leave, blocking the paths, watching us with those empty eyes. Margaret returned one last time, slipping into our camp at dawn. She looked terrified. "My tribe's records," she explained. "They say this entity is ancient. It's been here for thousands of years, consuming whole villages when they settle in the valley. It goes dormant for decades, sometimes centuries, then wakes when new people arrive." "How do we stop it?" I asked desperately. "I don't know if you can," she said. "It's patient. It influences slowly through the spores. You've all been breathing them since you arrived. Some people are more resistant, but eventually," she didn't need to finish. We all knew what she meant. That evening, I made a terrible discovery. While searching for medicine in our storage shed, I found tiny spores growing on our food supplies, our water filters, even our soap. Looking at them under Eliza's microscope confirmed it. The entity had been influencing us from the beginning, slowly preparing our bodies to host its children. We were never free. From the day we arrived, the forest had been working on us, changing us bit by bit, making us part of itself. And now it was ready to complete the transformation. One morning, I woke up to the sound of hammering. The infected members of our community, now more than half our group, had started building something in the center of our clearing. They worked without talking, without stopping for food or water. Their movements were smooth and certain, like they all shared one mind. The structure was made of wood, freshly cut branches and trunks that the forest seemed to provide without anyone having to chop down trees. I watched from my cabin window as Jason stood perfectly still while a branch grew toward him, bent itself into shape, and snapped off right into his waiting hands. Only 7 of us remained uninfected. Me, Eliza, Lisa, Sarah, and 3 others. We huddled in my cabin, afraid to eat or drink anything that might have spores on it. "We need to leave," Sarah said. "Now, while they're busy building." We grabbed only what we could carry and slipped away while the infected people worked. We headed for the road where we'd first entered the valley, but after walking for hours, we ended up back at our camp. We tried another direction, following the creek that should have led to the highway. Again, we found ourselves back where we started. "The forest is changing the paths," Eliza said, her voice shaking. "It's keeping us here." That night, while the others slept, I went exploring with a flashlight. Near the edge of our property, I found something that made my blood run cold. An old, rusted pickup truck half buried in the ground, completely covered in moss and fungi. Inside was a lunchbox with a faded name tag, property of Wilson Lumber Company 1973, the timber company that had sold us the land. I kept searching and found more. Old tools, rotted cloth that might have been tents, even a concrete foundation of a small building we'd never noticed before. All of it was being slowly broken down by the forest, covered in the same fungi we'd found on Jason. When I showed the others what I'd found, Lisa remembered something. "The bone fragments Mike found when digging the root cellar," she said. "I bet those weren't animal bones at all. We were not the first people the forest had taken. And based on what I found, none of the others had escaped." The next day, we watched in horror as the infected people continued building their wooden structure. It was taking shape now, a tall tower with a wide, bowl-like top. Jason climbed too, the highest point, his body moving in ways that weren't human anymore. His neck could turn all the way around, and his arms bent at odd angles. "He can see through them," Eliza whispered as we watched from hiding. "The creature, it sees through. All of them at once. Through the animals too. That's how it always knows where we are." She was right. Whenever we moved, birds would suddenly fly in our direction. Squirrels would chatter, giving away our position. The whole forest was its eyes and ears. By the 3rd day, some of our infected friends had stopped moving entirely. They stood in the garden, their feet planted in the soil, arms raised to the sky. Mushrooms and other growths covered their bodies. Tom's skin split open in places, revealing shelf-like fungi that released clouds of spores when the wind blew. They weren't people anymore. They were becoming spore towers, living factories to make more of whatever this thing was. That evening, Eliza grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide with fear, but also with understanding. "I know what it is," she said. "It's not from here, Daniel, not from Earth at all." She showed me samples she'd been studying, cells from the fungi, from the infected people, from the strange plants in our garden. The DNA, it's all wrong. It follows patterns, but not ones that evolved here. I think it crashed in this valley maybe thousands of years ago. It's been adapting, learning to use the life forms here. "Learning to use us," I finished for her. At sunset, Margaret appeared at our hiding place. She looked exhausted, like she'd been running. She handed me a small leather pouch. My tribe contained it before, she said, with borders and rituals. But when you built here, you broke the old boundaries. What do you mean, I asked. The hollow trees with the symbols, they were warnings, not decorations. My ancestors carved them to mark the ritual borders that kept the entity trapped in this valley. She showed me a map her tribe had kept. It matched the pattern of hollow trees exactly, forming a star-shaped boundary around the valley. When you cut trees to build your cabins, she said, you broke the star. As night fell, we watched the wooden tower grow taller. The infected people had finished the bowl-shaped top and filled it with something dark and wet, a mixture of soil, plant matter, and what looked horribly like blood. I realized what they were building, a massive device to release spores beyond. The valley, the entity wanted to spread. That night I dreamed I was the forest again, but this time I understood what I was seeing. The creature showed me its true self, not the Sasquatch-like form we'd seen, but its real nature. It was a network, a collective mind that lived in the connections between things. The fungi were its nerves, the trees its body, the animals and humans its hands and eyes. It had been alone for so long, crashed on a strange world. Now it was ready to spread across the whole planet. I woke up screaming, knowing we had almost no time left to stop it. Morning came with a heavy fog that clung to the ground. The tower in the center of our clearing was finished. It stood nearly 30 feet tall, its wooden sides glistening with moisture. The bowl at the top was filled to the brim with a dark mixture that bubbled slowly, like it was alive. We have until sundown, Margaret told us. When the moon rises, they'll activate it. In the leather pouch she'd given me, I found a small book with faded drawings. It showed a ritual, a ceremony her ancestors had used to contain the entity centuries ago. We need to place these symbols at specific spots, she explained, pointing to a map. The same spots where you found the hollow trees, and each symbol needs to be marked with blood from someone the entity hasn't infected. It was our only hope. We split up, each taking a different direction. Lisa went north, Sarah east, Eliza south, and I headed west. Margaret and the others stayed to watch, the infected people ready to warn us if they noticed what we were doing. I carried a knife and a small pot of paint mixed with my own blood. The spot I needed to reach was the furthest, a massive redwood at the western edge of the valley. The forest fought me every step of the way. Paths vanished as soon as I took them. Branches reached down to block my way. Roots rose up to trip me, but I kept going, using the sun to keep my direction. When I finally reached the hollow tree, I found the old symbols carved inside. Following Margaret's instructions, I painted new ones next to them with the blood mixture, hoping I was doing it right. As I finished, I heard a scream from the direction of our camp. The entity had figured out what we were doing. I ran back as fast as I could, but the forest worked even harder to stop me. I had to crawl through thick bushes that hadn't been there before, climb over fallen logs that blocked every path. When I finally made it back, I found chaos. The infected people had split up too, hunting down my friends before they could complete the ritual, and they were changing faster now, their bodies transforming as I watched. Jason wasn't even human-shaped anymore. His arms had grown longer, his back hunched. The bark-like skin covered him completely, and fungi grew from his face in shelf-like layers. He moved like the Sasquatch creature now, part human, part tree, part fungus. Did everyone make it? I asked Margaret when I found her hiding near the cabins. Sarah and Eliza completed their symbols, she said, but we haven't heard from Lisa. We waited as long as we dared, but Lisa never returned. With sunset approaching, we had to finish the ritual without her final symbol. The three of us, me, Margaret, and Sarah, stood at points around the camp, using the last of our blood mixture to draw symbols on the ground. As we finished, the air grew heavy and still. The infected people all turned toward us at once, then froze in place. For a moment I thought it had worked. Then the ground began to shake. Roots erupted from the earth, wrapping around Margaret's legs. She screamed as they pulled her down, disappearing into the soil before we could reach her. Sarah and I ran for the valley's edge, where the ritual had weakened the forest's control. For the first time, we could see a path leading out. As we reached the boundary, Eliza caught up with us, her breathing heavy. "I found Lisa," she gasped. She completed her symbol before they got her." The three of us pushed through finally, breaking free of the valley. We kept running until we reached the highway, where a trucker stopped to help us. We must have looked terrible, dirty, bleeding, wild-eyed with fear. He drove us to the nearest town, where we tried to tell the police. What had happened? They thought we were crazy or on drugs. How could they believe us? It sounded impossible, even to my own ears as I said it out loud. But they agreed to send someone to check on our community. We waited at the small police station, hoping against hope that the ritual had worked, that the entity was contained again. The next morning, Sarah complained of feeling sick. By afternoon, both she and Eliza had developed fevers. That night, I watched in horror as tiny growths appeared at the corners of their eyes, the same mushroom-like structures that had been the first sign in Jason. The spores had been in their lungs all along, just waiting. They attacked the deputy, who came to check on them, their movements already changing, becoming less human. More officers came. They were infected too as soon as they entered the room. I ran, stole a car, drove until I reached the next town. I called every government agency I could think of, trying to warn them. Finally, someone listened, or seemed to. Men in hazmat suits took me to a quarantine facility. They asked questions for days, took samples of my blood, my skin, my hair. "You're clean," they told me eventually. "No sign of the fungal infection." I almost believed them, almost believed I had escaped, until I saw the satellite photos on one of their computer screens. The images showed the valley where Harmony Grove had been, and the infection spreading outward in all directions, following the root systems of trees, jumping from forest to forest. The ritual hadn't stopped it. It had only slowed it down. That night, alone in my room, I felt an itch on my arm. When I looked, I saw a small patch of skin turning hard and bark-like. Not where they had tested. They hadn't seen this spot. It was small, just beginning. I should tell someone. I should scream for help, but I don't, because part of me doesn't want to. Part of me wants to let it grow, to join the entity, to become part of something vast and ancient and patient. I can feel it in my dreams now, stronger than ever. The network spreading, mile by mile, forest by forest, the hunger growing. And I understand now what Margaret's people always knew. Some valleys should remain empty. Some forests should be left alone, because not all dark places are empty. Sometimes they're already full. My name is Thomas Rawlins, and I used to think I was a writer. 4 years ago, my first novel got some decent reviews, but didn't sell much. Since then, I've been stuck, staring at blank pages, starting and stopping. Nothing good coming out. My agent stopped calling 6 months ago. That's why I'm here at this old lake house in the middle of nowhere, trying to prove to myself that I'm not a one-hit wonder. The place sits on Stillwater Lake, deep in the Ozarks of Missouri. It's June 1964, and I've rented it for the whole summer. I figured the peace and quiet would help the words flow again. No distractions, no excuses. When I first drove up the winding dirt road, the lake looked like something from a postcard. Clear blue water stretching out, surrounded by tall pines and rocky cliffs. The house itself isn't much. 2 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, and a kitchen with appliances older than I am. But it has a wide porch facing the water, and that's where I set up my typewriter. The isolation is exactly what I was looking for. The rental agent told me the nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, and you can only reach them by boat. The town is a good 40-minute drive through winding forest roads, perfect for forcing myself to focus. On my first full day, I woke at sunrise and made a pot of coffee. I decided right away that I needed a routine. Wake up early, write until lunch, explore in the afternoon, then edit in the evening. Structure, that's what I've been missing. Structure and commitment. The first week passed in a blur of clacking typewriter keys and walks along the shoreline. I found a rhythm that felt good, waking with the birds and falling asleep to the sounds of water lapping against the dock. For the first time in years, the words were coming. Not just any words, good ones. The kinds of sentences that made me feel like a real writer again. On day 8, a truck rumbled up the drive, kicking up dust. That's when I met Harold Winters, the caretaker. He's a leathery old man, probably in his 70s, with hands like tree bark and eyes that seem to see right through you. Brought your supplies, he said, unloading boxes of canned goods, fresh bread, and vegetables. Town's too far to be making trips all the time. I thanked him and offered him coffee. He accepted, with a nod, and we sat on the porch looking out at the water. Beautiful lake, I said. Harold grunted. Pretty enough, but the lake ain't been right since the drought of '57. What happened then? He sipped his coffee. Water dropped lower than anyone had seen, exposed things best left covered. He didn't elaborate, and something in his tone made me not want to. Before leaving, Harold showed me the well system. House has its own water supply, he explained, pointing to a stone structure about 50 yards from the back door. Lake water's fine for swimming, but for drinking and cooking, you use the well. Makes better sense. There was something in his voice that made it sound less like advice and more like an order. I nodded agreement, not thinking much of it at the time. The next day, I went for my first real swim. The water was cool and refreshing in the June heat. I dove deep, surprised at how clear the lake was. You could see straight to the bottom in many places. That's when I noticed them for the first time. Rock formations under the water that didn't look natural. They formed patterns too regular to be random, almost like they'd been placed deliberately. Some looked like they might have been part of buildings once, though that seemed impossible this far from civilization. I didn't think much about it then. I was too excited about my writing. The words were pouring out of me like never before. 10 pages on my first day, 15 the next. By the end of 2 weeks, I'd written more than I had in the entire previous year. The story was different from what I'd planned, darker, more primal, but it felt true in a way my earlier attempts never had. One afternoon, while taking a break on the dock, I noticed a small boat approaching. A woman with short dark hair pulled up and introduced herself as Lillian Campbell. I'm studying the lake, she explained. The ecology here is unlike anything else in the region. Lillian was a biologist from the State University. She told me she'd been monitoring the lake for months, setting up equipment at different points along the shore. I found her fascinating and invited her for dinner, happy for some intelligent conversation after days of solitude. Over canned stew and boxed wine, she told me about her research. The water is receding much faster than it should be, she explained. We've had normal rainfall, but the evaporation rates are off the charts. Could it be the heat? I asked. She shook her head. No, it's something else. The water chemistry is changing too. I'm trying to figure out why. I told her about the strange rock formations I'd seen underwater, and her eyes lit up with interest. She promised to look at them the next time she came by. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about our conversation had unsettled me. I went to the porch and looked out at the moonlit water. Lillian was right. The lake level had dropped, even in the short time I'd been there. Where the water had receded, I could now see more of those strange stone shapes along the shore that had been completely submerged before. The next morning, I decided to explore the newly exposed shoreline. The stones were even more intriguing up close. Squared edges, some with what looked like deliberate carvings. I couldn't help but wonder if this had once been a settlement of some kind, now long forgotten, near what must have been the old shoreline. Before the recession, I found a small rowboat half buried in mud. It looked abandoned for years, its wood rotting and warped. Inside, protected from the elements by a metal box, I found several notebooks. The water damage made much of the writing illegible, but I could make out dates from 1958 and scattered phrases about anomalous water behavior and accelerated recession patterns. One passage in particular caught my eye. When the water pulls back, it reveals what it has been hiding. But it is not retreat, it is preparation. I took the journals back to the house, uncertain what to make of them. That night, I dreamed of swimming in the lake, diving deeper and deeper toward those stone formations. In the dream, they weren't ruins at all, but something being built, something waiting. I woke up with an unquenchable thirst. The day after finding those old journals, I woke up with my mouth feeling like sandpaper. I drank 3 full glasses of water from the kitchen tap, but the thirst wouldn't go away. Strange, I thought. Maybe I was coming down with something. My writing continued to flow, better than ever. Words poured out of me like water from a broken dam. I wrote about a man slowly losing his mind in an isolated place, which wasn't what I had planned when I came here. But the story felt right, like it was telling itself through me. A week after finding the journals, I noticed something odd. Despite a heavy rain the night before, the lake had dropped even more. It didn't make sense. Where was all the water going? That morning, I walked the newly exposed shoreline. What I saw made me stop in my tracks. The receding water had revealed a series of stone formations that looked like the foundations of buildings. They formed perfect circles and squares, too regular to be natural. Some had strange symbols carved into them that reminded me of ancient writing, though I couldn't place what kind. I took pictures with the small camera I'd brought along. No one would believe this without proof. That afternoon, Lillian's boat appeared at my dock again. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes. "Have you seen what's happening to the shoreline?" I asked as she tied up her boat. "That's why I'm here," she nodded. "It's not just your side of the lake. It's happening everywhere." We walked to where I'd seen the stone formations. Lillian crouched down to examine them, running her fingers over the strange symbols. "There's an old story the locals tell," she said, not looking up, "about something they call the desiccator. According to folklore, there's a creature that periodically drains water sources throughout the region's history." "A creature? Like what? A monster?" I laughed, but Lillian didn't join in. "Indigenous. People in this area have pictographs dating back centuries, showing a being that could control water. Early settlers reported entire ponds disappearing overnight." She stood up and brushed dirt from her hands. "It's just folklore, of course, but something is causing this lake to drain faster than any natural process can explain." After Lillian left, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said. Monster stories didn't scare me. I wrote fiction for a living. But those stone formations were real, and so was the dropping water level. That night, I had my first hallucination. I was standing on the dock, looking out at the lake in the moonlight. One moment, the water was full and sparkling, lapping at the wood beneath my feet. The next moment, it was yards away, leaving nothing but muddy bottom where water should have been. I blinked, and the lake was full again. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I was more tired than I thought. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. I went to bed, drinking 3 more glasses of water before lying down. The next day, I searched the house for any information about previous tenants. In a drawer full of old receipts and papers, I found a letter addressed to the property owner from someone named Dr. James Mercer, dated 1962. He described himself as a hydrologist studying unusual water composition changes in Stillwater Lake. The letter mentioned he would be extending his stay to complete critical observations during the acceleration phase. There was no other correspondence from Dr. Mercer. I wondered if he was the owner of the journals I'd found in the boat. But where was he now? I decided to ask Harold about it when he came with supplies. The old caretaker arrived later that afternoon, and I helped him unload the truck. Ever hear of someone named Dr. Mercer who stayed here? I asked, casually. Harold's hands paused for just a second before continuing to unpack a box of canned goods. Scientist fella, kept to himself, mostly. What happened to him? Did he finish his research? Can't say, Harold replied, not meeting my eyes. He left sudden-like, didn't say where to. His tone made it clear he didn't want to talk about it, but I pressed on. Did he leave any of his equipment or notes behind? Owner cleared all that out, Harold said quickly. Listen, Mr. Rollins, how's that well water treating you? You drinking it like I told you? I admitted I'd been using the tap water in the kitchen, which I assumed came from the well. Kitchen tap's hooked to the lake water, Harold said, frowning. Told you to use the well pump out back for drinking. Lake water ain't good for drinking. No more. There was something in his expression. Was it worry? Fear? I promised I'd use the well water from now on. Later that day, I took a walk along the exposed lake bed. The water had receded even more, leaving a wide ring of mud and stones around the lake. The smell was strange. Not the rotting fish smell you'd expect, but something sweeter, almost like overripe fruit. As I walked, I found something disturbing. The dried-out carcass of a deer. It looked wrong somehow. Not decomposed, but desiccated. Like a mummy, all the moisture pulled out, leaving just skin stretched over bones. Near it was a raccoon in the same condition, and further on, several birds, all completely dried out, as if they'd been vacuum sealed. That night, I used the well pump as Harold had instructed. The water tasted slightly sweet, but it was cold and refreshing. I found myself drinking more and more of it, my thirst seemingly impossible to satisfy. I must have had at least a gallon before going to bed. A thunderstorm rolled in around midnight, waking me with bright flashes of lightning. I went to the window to watch. I've always loved storms. But what I saw made no sense. The rain was falling, everywhere except over the lake. It was as if an invisible umbrella covered the water, the raindrops curving around some unseen barrier. I rubbed my eyes, sure I was seeing things, but the unnatural pattern continued until the storm passed. The next day when Harold came by, I mentioned what I'd seen. Rain does that sometimes, he said vaguely, but his eyes shifted away. Listen, Mr. Rollins, there's something you should know about this lake. We sat on the porch, and Harold spoke in a low voice, as if afraid of being overheard. This ain't just any lake. Whatever's in it affects the water table of the entire region. Been that way long as anyone can remember. Cycles of drought follow a pattern here. Every few decades, the lake pulls back, just like you're seeing now. Pulls back? You make it sound like the lake is alive, I said. Harold didn't answer directly. My daddy watched over this property, and his daddy before him. We've been keeping track. Last time the lake acted this way was 1957. Before that, 1927, and 1898 before that. What happens when the lake pulls back? I asked. Best not to be around when it reaches the lowest point, Harold said grimly. Before he left, I asked if I could look at any records he or his family had kept about the lake. He seemed reluctant, but agreed to bring some old papers on his next visit. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. In the boathouse, I found diving equipment that must have belonged to the previous tenant, Dr. Mercer. There was an underwater recording device with waterproof headphones. I decided to take it out on the lake. In the small rowboat, I dropped the hydrophone into the water and put on the headphones. At first, I heard nothing but the usual underwater sounds, bubbles, the distant motor of Lillian's research boat. Then I heard it, a low, rhythmic pulsing. Not mechanical, but not like any fish or natural sound I'd ever heard. It was like a heartbeat, but slower, and beneath that, A sound like water being drawn through a straw, amplified 1,000 times. Then something else, movement. Something large displacing water. I pulled up the hydrophone and rowed back to shore as fast as I could, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was on the open water. That night, I dreamed I was swimming in the lake again. But this time, as I dove toward those stone formations, I saw they weren't ruins at all. They were a foundation, and something was building on them. I woke up shaking, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cool night air. My thirst was worse than ever. I drank straight from the well pump outside, gulping down water like a man rescued from a desert. But no matter how much I drank, I couldn't quench the burning dryness in my throat. And as the first light of dawn broke over the trees, I looked out at the lake and saw that the water had receded another 6 feet overnight. I couldn't sleep that night, my thoughts spinning like leaves in a whirlpool. Around midnight, I went outside for fresh air. The moon was full, casting silver light across what remained of the lake. On a whim, I decided to go for a swim to clear my head. The moment my feet touched the water, I felt something was different. The water seemed thicker somehow, almost syrupy. I waded in up to my waist, then pushed off into a gentle crawl toward the center of the lake where the water was still deep. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a large fish or maybe a turtle, something pale moving beneath the surface about 20 yards away. But then it rose higher in the water, and I realized with a jolt of terror that it was far too big to be any fish native to these waters. The creature broke the surface just enough for me to see it in the moonlight. Its skin was a translucent, white, like wax paper held up to light. I could make out organs pulsing beneath that skin, not human organs, but something else, chambers and sacs that expanded and contracted rhythmically. It had a vaguely human shape, but was all wrong, too. Long, too fluid in its movements. Where a face should be, there was only a series of small openings that puckered and relaxed, like tiny mouths constantly opening and closing. Our eyes met. Or at least, I felt it looking at me with what I assumed were sensory organs near the top of its body. For a moment, we both remained still, suspended in mutual shock of discovery. Then it moved toward me. I've never swum so fast in my life. My arms churned the water as panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. Just as I reached the shallows, I felt something cold and wet wrap around my ankle, a tendril or limb of some kind. The touch lasted only a second before I kicked free and scrambled onto shore. But that brief contact was enough. Where it had touched me, my skin turned gray and cracked like mud drying in the sun. An intense sensation of thirst flooded through me, worse than anything I'd felt before. I limped back to the house, locked all the doors and windows, and drank directly from the faucet for nearly 5 minutes straight. The water didn't help. My ankle throbbed with pain, the skin flaking off in patches, revealing raw flesh beneath. I called Lillian on the emergency radio Harold had shown me when I first arrived. She answered after several tries, her voice groggy with sleep. "Something's in the lake," I said, my voice shaking. "I saw it. It touched me." There was a long pause. "I'm coming over," she finally said. "Stay inside." Lillian arrived an hour later, carrying a medical kit and scientific equipment I didn't recognize. She gasped when she saw my ankle. "Extreme dehydration," she murmured, carefully examining the affected skin, "but localized, like it's been selectively extracted." She wrapped my ankle in gauze, soaked in some kind of solution that smelled medicinal. "I've been studying samples of lake water in my lab," she told me as she worked. "There are microscopic organisms in it that I've never seen documented before. In tests, they accelerate dehydration in tissue samples at an alarming rate." "The creature I saw wasn't microscopic," I said. "It was big, person-sized at least." Lillian nodded slowly. "The folklore might have some basis, in fact." What if these microorganisms are part of a larger biological system? What if they're like extensions of something bigger? The idea made my skin crawl. It could control the rain, I said, remembering the storm. I saw it. The rain curved around the lake like it was being pushed away. Water manipulation, Lillian said thoughtfully. Creating drought conditions that defy meteorological explanation. Thomas, this could be an undiscovered species with incredible abilities. It's dangerous, I insisted. Look at what it did to my ankle with just a touch. She couldn't argue with that. Before leaving, she took samples of the well water and promised to analyze them right away. After she left, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my typewriter instead, hoping work would distract me. But when I looked at what I'd written over the past days, I felt a cold shock run through me. My manuscript had changed. The story was no longer about what I thought I was writing. Instead, it had become a first-person account of a character slowly surrendering to a water-based entity, allowing it to absorb his consciousness bit by bit. Pages I didn't remember typing described the peaceful sensation of letting go, of becoming part of something ancient and powerful that lived in the water. That's when I noticed the well water. I'd been drinking it constantly, keeping a glass by my typewriter. Harold's insistence that I drink only from the well now seemed suspicious. I poured the remaining water down the sink. The next day, Harold arrived with supplies as usual. I confronted him the moment he stepped out of his truck. "What's in the well water?" I demanded. "And don't tell me it's nothing." Harold's weathered face seemed to age another decade as he sighed. "Come with me," he said. He led me to the boathouse and unlocked a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. Inside was a metal box containing notebooks, maps, and photographs dating back decades. The lake house wasn't built as a vacation home, Harold explained, as he spread the documents on. A workbench. It was built to monitor the thing in the lake. My grandfather was part of a group that discovered it in the 1890s. They built this place to keep watch. The photographs showed the lake at different stages of recession over the years. The earliest ones were yellowed with age, showing men in old-fashioned clothes, standing beside exposed stone formations, identical to those I'd seen recently. "What is it?" I asked. "The thing in the lake?" "We don't rightly know," Harold admitted, "but it follows a cycle. Every 30 years or so, the lake recedes and it becomes more active. It needs to be fed during these times." "Fed?" I repeated, my mouth suddenly dry. "What does it eat?" Harold wouldn't meet my eyes. "It doesn't eat exactly. It absorbs water mainly, but also—" He trailed off. "The well water," I said, the pieces falling into place. "It's part of this, isn't it?" Harold nodded reluctantly. "The well taps into water the creature has processed. It creates thirst in those who drink it, makes them crave more and more. It's part of how it lures people to the lake." "You've been making me drink it on purpose," I said, anger rising in my chest. "You've been preparing me for it." "Someone has to be the caretaker," Harold said defensively. "My family has done this for generations. The thing needs to be contained, fed enough to keep it dormant most of the time. If it's not satisfied, it could move on to larger water sources. Imagine what would happen if it reached the Mississippi River." The thought made me shudder, but I was still angry. "So I'm what? A sacrifice?" "More like a guardian," Harold said. "The connection works both ways. Through the water you can learn to communicate with it, keep it calm. Dr. Mercer almost succeeded, but he went too far. Got too curious. What happened to him?" Harold's face darkened. "He's still here in a way, part of the lake now." I felt sick. "And Lillian? Does she know about all this?" "She suspects something. That's why she's studying the lake. But she doesn't know the whole truth." As if summoned by her name, we heard the sound of a boat motor approaching the dock. Lillian had returned, and from the look on her face as she hurried toward us, she had discovered something important. "The well water," she said, without preamble, holding up a vial of cloudy liquid. It's full of the same microorganisms as the lake, but they've been altered. They create a false sense of thirst and form a kind of psychic link with the host organism, the creature in the lake. She looked at Harold, then back at me. "You knew," she accused Harold. "You've been giving him this water deliberately." Harold said nothing, his face like stone. "There's more," Lillian continued. "I found records of similar phenomena in other isolated lakes across the country, always with the same pattern. 30 years of dormancy, then a period of activity where the water recedes and people go missing. It's building something," I said, remembering my dream. "Using those stone formations in the lake bed." Lillian nodded. "I took underwater photographs yesterday. It's arranging the stones in a specific pattern, like a nest, or maybe an altar of some kind." That afternoon I tried to leave. I packed my car and started driving toward town, determined to get as far from Stillwater Lake as possible. I made it about 2 miles before the symptoms hit me. Intense headache, unbelievable thirst, and then my skin began to crack and flake just like my ankle had after the creature touched me. I barely made it back to the lake house alive. The moment I stepped onto the property, the symptoms began to ease. I realized with horror that I was trapped. The creature had somehow bound me to this place. That night, Lillian stayed at the house, too afraid to cross the lake alone after dark. We sat on the porch, watching the water gleam under the stars. "I found a hidden cache of research in the boathouse," I told her. "Notes suggesting the thing in the lake isn't a single creature, but a colonial organism. It needs new bodies of water periodically." "That fits with what I've observed," Lillian said. "The microorganisms can exist independently, but seem to function as part of a hive mind." She hesitated. "Thomas, have you been experiencing anything strange? Besides the thirst, I mean." I almost told her about my manuscript changing, about writing things I didn't remember. Instead, I mentioned the difficulty leaving the property. "It's creating a dependency," she said. "The organisms in your system are reaching critical mass. They're rewriting your biology from the inside out. Can you help me?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. "I'm going to try," she promised. "But I need to get more equipment from my lab. I'll come back tomorrow morning." But Lillian didn't return the next day, or the day after that. On the third day, Harold arrived with supplies and a grim expression. "She won't be coming back." He said flatly, "Best you accept what's happening and make peace with it." That night, I had the strangest experience of my life. As I sat on the dock, my feet dangling in the water, I suddenly had a vivid memory of swimming in Stillwater Lake in 1932. But I wasn't born until 1935. The memory wasn't mine, it belonged to someone else, someone who had been absorbed by the creature in the lake. The water memories continued over the next few days, fragments of lives from people who had come to the lake over decades. Through these borrowed memories, I began to understand what the creature was doing. It was gathering strength, preparing for something big, and somehow I knew it wanted me to join it in the water. Not just for a swim, it wanted me to surrender, completely. The thought should have terrified me, but instead I found it strangely comforting, like coming home after a long journey. I resisted the pull, focusing instead on finding Lillian. I took the small motorboat Harold had left and searched the shoreline of the entire lake. Near a cove on the far side, I found her research boat, abandoned, and floating at the center of the lake I found Lillian, or what remained of her. Her body was desiccated, all moisture extracted, leaving just a dried husk that barely resembled a human. Her skin had turned translucent in places, like paper held up to light. Through those translucent patches, I could see her organs, shriveled and grey. I brought her body back to shore, my hands shaking so badly I could barely steer the boat. As I wrapped her in a blanket, I noticed something odd. Tiny tendrils had begun to grow from her skin, like roots seeking water. The creature wasn't just taking from its victims, it was transforming them. That night, as I sat with Lillian's body, waiting for Harold to arrive, I felt the creature's presence more strongly than ever before. Not just in the lake, but everywhere the water touched, the air, the ground, my own body. It existed as both a physical entity and as a contaminant within water systems, and it was ancient. Through the water memories, I glimpsed images of the creature interacting with indigenous peoples centuries ago. I saw rock art depicting a being that controlled water, that could bring drought or abundance. The being wasn't evil exactly. It was simply following its nature, just as a wolf hunts or a tree grows towards sunlight. But its nature was to consume, to absorb, to expand. And if it reached beyond Stillwater Lake, the consequences would be devastating. When Harold finally arrived, he took one look at Lillian's body and nodded grimly, as if this was exactly what he had expected. "Now you understand," he said softly, "why my family has kept watch all these years, why someone always has to stay." We buried Lillian at the edge of the property, under a large oak tree overlooking the lake. Harold said little during our makeshift funeral, but his eyes held a weight of sorrow that spoke of many similar burials over the years. After we patted down the last of the dirt, Harold handed me a leather-bound book. "My family's records," he said, "been keeping track of the creature's patterns for generations. You need to understand what we're dealing with." That night, I pored over the book by lamplight. The pages documented decades of observations, sketches, of the creature in various forms and notes on its behavior. Harold's grandfather had started the record in 1898, followed by his father, and then Harold himself. The most disturbing entries described what happened during the hunger phase of each 30-year cycle. The creature needed more than just water. It seemed to absorb consciousness, memories, life essence, whatever you want to call it, from living beings. The well water was part of its feeding strategy, creating a bond with potential hosts. I realized with growing horror that I wasn't just being prepared as food. I was being prepared as a vessel. The next morning, Harold returned with a man I hadn't met before, Dr. Ellis, a stern-faced scientist in his 60s. "Harold called me when your friend went missing," Dr. Ellis explained. "I've been studying the creature alongside Harold's family for 40 years. Can you help me?" I asked. "I can't leave. It's done something to me." Dr. Ellis examined my ankle where the creature had touched me. The skin there had turned almost translucent, like wax paper. When he pressed it, I felt no pain. "The transformation has begun," he said grimly. "The microorganisms are restructuring your cellular makeup, first the skin, then internal organs." "What does that mean?" I demanded. "What's happening to me?" "The creature is ancient," Dr. Ellis said. "It hibernates for decades, then awakens when environmental conditions are right. But it also needs extensions, ways to interact with the world above water." "Are you saying it's turning me into some kind of appendage?" The thought made me sick. "More like a terrestrial extension," Dr. Ellis corrected. "It needs a human vessel to help it prepare for migration to a larger water body." Migration. The word sent a chill through me. If this thing reached a major water system like the Mississippi, how do we stop it? I asked. Dr. Ellis and Harold exchanged looks. "There's a mineral compound," Dr. Ellis said carefully. "We've used it in the past to force the creature into early hibernation, but it's dangerous, must be introduced directly into the creature's primary body." He pulled out a small metal case from his bag, opening it to reveal several glass vials, filled with bluish powder, concentrated copper sulfate mixed with other elements. It disrupts the creature's cellular cohesion, forcing dormancy. "So we just dump this in the lake?" I asked. "Not that simple," Harold cut in. "Lake's too big, compound would dilute. Needs to be delivered to the center, what we call the core body. Where the stones are being arranged," I realized. Dr. Ellis nodded. Exactly, but there's a problem. Anyone closely bonded to the creature, like you're becoming, will experience severe trauma if the compound is used. Your systems are becoming linked. The implication hung in the air. Stopping the creature might kill me too. Before they left, Dr. Ellis gave me 2 of the vials. Just in case, he said, we'll prepare more and return tomorrow with proper equipment to administer it. But I knew something they didn't. Through the water memories, I'd glimpsed the creature's intentions. It wasn't going to wait much longer. The alignment of stones was nearly complete. That afternoon, I noticed police cars on the distant shore. Through binoculars, I could see officers talking to locals, pointing toward the lake. Lillian's disappearance hadn't gone unnoticed. By evening, a police boat was making its way across the lake toward my dock. 2 officers, one older with a sheriff's badge, one younger in a deputy uniform. Thomas Rawlins, the sheriff called as they tied up their boat. We'd like to ask you some questions about Lillian Campbell. I invited them in, offered coffee, which they accepted. The younger officer kept looking out the window at the unnaturally receded lake. Water's mighty low, he commented. Never seen it pull back this far. Been a dry summer, the sheriff said dismissively, then turned to me. Ms. Campbell's colleagues at the university reported her missing 3 days ago. Her research notes mentioned she was spending time at this property. I told them part of the truth, that Lillian had been studying the lake, that she'd come by several times, that I hadn't seen her recently. I didn't mention finding her body. What would I say? That a water creature had drained her like a juice box? As they questioned me, I noticed something odd. The younger officer kept drinking water, glass after glass from my kitchen tap. The sheriff seemed unusually thirsty too, repeatedly licking his lips. The creature was influencing them already. Mind if we look around the property? The sheriff asked. But his eyes had a glazed quality that hadn't been there when they arrived. Of course, I said, knowing what would happen. They never made it back to their boat. I found them an hour later, wading into the lake fully clothed, moving like sleepwalkers. I called their names, tried to pull them back, but they pushed me away with surprising strength. I watched helplessly as they swam to the center of the lake where the water was still, deep. They never resurfaced. That night, the transformation of my body accelerated. My skin had developed a translucent quality across my arms and chest, revealing the outline of muscles and organs beneath. When I pressed my fingers against my forearm, water seemed to shift beneath the surface. More disturbing was what was happening to my mind. Thoughts that weren't mine kept intruding, ancient memories of dark water, of stone structures built and abandoned through centuries, of bodies absorbed, and knowledge gained. I began to understand what the creature truly was, not just a predator, but a collector. It preserved the consciousness of those it absorbed, a living library of experiences and memories, spanning thousands of years. And it was using these memories, this accumulated knowledge, to build something in the lake center, a structure that would amplify its ability to extract groundwater from surrounding areas. To reach water tables miles away, it needed to feed heavily before its next hibernation cycle. But this time, it was planning something bigger than before. At dawn, I heard vehicles approaching. Harold and Dr. Ellis had returned with equipment, pumps, hoses, diving gear, and more of the blue compound. They had a plan to deliver the mineral solution directly to the creature's core body, but they weren't alone. 3 other men were with them, locals, judging by their weathered faces and cautious demeanor. All carried rifles. "Thomas doesn't look too good," one of them muttered to Harold as they unloaded equipment. I caught my reflection in a window and understood their concern. My skin had a waxy, almost bluish tone. The veins beneath were clearly visible, pulsing with something that wasn't entirely blood anymore. "Sheriff and deputy went missing last night," another man said. "Their boat's still tied to your dock." I explained what had happened, how the creature had lured them into the water. The men exchanged grim looks. It's getting stronger, Harold said. Moving faster than previous cycles. Dr. Ellis approached me with a syringe. This might help slow your transformation, he explained, injecting a yellowish fluid into my arm. Concentrated salt solution. Disrupts the microorganisms temporarily. Whatever it was, it helped clear my head. For the first time in days, I felt more like myself, the alien thoughts receding to a dull background hum. We need to move quickly, Dr. Ellis said. Our equipment can deliver the compound to the center structure, but someone needs to guide the nozzle precisely. I've brought diving gear. I'll do it, I volunteered, knowing I was already too connected to the creature to escape my fate. Harold shook his head. Too dangerous in your condition. I'll go. But as they prepared the equipment, a low rumble came from the lake. The water at the center began to churn and bubble. It knows, I said, suddenly certain. It can sense what we're planning. The churning water erupted into a geyser 20 feet high. When it collapsed, something rose from the depths, a massive, translucent form that pulsed and shifted in the morning light. The creature had never fully revealed itself before. Its body was mostly water, held in a shape that vaguely resembled a massive jellyfish, but with dozens of tendrils extending from its central mass. Within its transparent body, darker shapes moved, organs perhaps, or the partially absorbed remains of its victims. The men raised their rifles, but Harold stopped them. Bullets won't do nothing to it, he warned. Just make it angry. The creature's tendrils stretched toward shore, growing impossibly long. One whipped across the dock, splintering wood. Another wrapped around one of the local men before anyone could react, lifting him into the air. We watched in horror as the man's body seemed to collapse in on itself, moisture visibly flowing through the tendril into the creature's main body. In seconds, all that remained was a dried husk that crumbled when the tendril dropped it. The compound, Dr. Ellis shouted. Get it ready now. But the creature was faster. More tendrils lashed out, destroying the equipment, smashing the pump, breaking the vials of blue powder. The remaining men fired their rifles in panic, despite Harold's warnings. The bullets passed through the creature's watery body with no effect. Another man was caught by a tendril, then another. Their bodies withered in seconds. Harold grabbed my arm. Inside! Now! We retreated to the lake house, barricading the doors and windows. Dr. Ellis was hit by flying debris during the chaos. A deep gash across his forehead bled profusely as Harold tried to bandage it. It's never shown itself like this, Harold said, his voice shaking. Never attacked so directly. It's because of me, I realized. I'm changing too fast. It doesn't want to lose its connection. Through the window, we could see the creature still hovering over the water, its tendrils exploring the shoreline like searching fingers. We need more of the compound, I said. Do you have any more vials? Dr. Ellis nodded weakly. In my car. Metal case in the trunk. I'll get it, I said, moving toward the door. Harold grabbed my arm. It'll kill you the moment you step outside. No, I said with strange certainty. It won't hurt me. It needs me. I was right. When I stepped onto the porch, the creature's tendrils stopped their frantic movement. They hovered in the air, swaying gently, but didn't approach me. I walked to Dr. Ellis's car, aware of the creature watching my every move. In the trunk, I found the metal case containing 6 more vials of the blue compound. As I turned back toward the house, I felt something I hadn't expected. A sensation, like someone speaking directly into my mind. Not with words, but with feelings, images, intentions. The creature was communicating with me. It showed me what it planned to do: move to the Mississippi River, spread throughout the water system of half the continent. Millions would be affected. It wasn't malicious exactly, just following its biological imperative to grow, to feed, to expand. And it wanted me to join it, to become its voice, its human extension. For a moment, the offer was tempting. to be part of something ancient and powerful, to experience consciousness in a way no human ever had. But then I saw what that would mean for others. Dried husks that used to be people, entire communities dying of thirst as their water sources vanished. I clutched the case of vials and ran back to the house. "It's trying to communicate with me," I told Harold and Dr. Ellis, "trying to convince me to help it." "Don't listen," Harold warned. "That's how it takes over. Gets in your head, makes its desires feel like your own." Dr. Ellis's condition was worsening. He'd lost too much blood, and his breathing had grown shallow. "The compound," he whispered, "must be delivered to the central mass, where the stones form a circle." "How?" I asked. "Our equipment is destroyed." "Direct contact," he said weakly. "Someone must take it directly to the core." Harold and I looked at each other, understanding what this meant. "A suicide mission." "I'll do it," Harold said. "My family started this watch. Fitting I should end it." But I shook my head. "No, it has to be me. I'm already connected to it. I can get closer than anyone else." And I knew something else. I was already changing too much to return to normal human life. The creature's influence had reshaped my biology. Even if we drove it into hibernation, I would never be fully human again. Dr. Ellis died as night fell. Harold and I watched the creature from the windows, its massive form glowing faintly in the moonlight as it hovered over the lake's center. "There's something you should know," Harold said quietly. "The compound doesn't kill it. Nothing can. Far as we know, it just forces hibernation. For how long? 30 years, give or take, then the cycle starts again." I thought about that. 30 years. Then someone else would stand where I was standing, facing the same horrible choice, unless I could find another way. Morning came with heavy fog covering the lake, so thick I could barely see the water from the porch. Harold and I had spent the night preparing. We'd wrapped the vials of blue powder in waterproof bags and mapped out the approach to the lake's center, where the stone circle waited. "You sure about this?" Harold asked for the third time. "Once you're in that water, I can't help you." I looked down at my hands. The skin was almost completely transparent now, the bones and tendons clearly visible underneath. My transformation was too far along to reverse. "I'm sure," I said. "But I need you to promise me something. If I don't come back, burn everything. My manuscript, my notes, all of it." Harold nodded solemnly. We waited until midday when the fog finally lifted. The creature had withdrawn somewhat, its massive form hovering just beneath the water's surface, at the center of the lake. Its tendrils moved lazily through the water like searching fingers. I changed into swimming trunks, tucked the waterproof bag of vials into a belt pouch, and walked to the shore. Each step felt strange. My body no longer quite solid, more like a water balloon with just enough skin to hold it together. "Good luck," Harold said simply, clasping my shoulder. I waded into the lake. The water felt different now, not like I was entering it, but like I was rejoining a part of myself. My altered skin absorbed the lake water directly, a pleasant tingling sensation replacing the usual feeling of wetness. As I swam toward the center, I felt the creature's awareness turn toward me. Not hostile, but curious, like a dog watching someone approach with food. It recognized me as something different. Not quite prey, not quite kin, but something in between. About halfway to the center, the communication began again, images and sensations flooding my mind. The creature showed me what it had shown others before me, a vision of unity, of power, of endless existence as part of something ancient. It showed me memories from hundreds, maybe thousands of years. Indigenous people leaving offerings by the lakeshore, early settlers disappearing during drought years, scientists coming to study the strange phenomena only to become part of it. I kept swimming, focusing on my mission, even as the visions threatened to overwhelm me. The water around, Me grew strangely warm. Tendrils rose from the depths but didn't attack. They brushed against my skin, almost gently, like curious fingers. At the center of the lake, I dove. The water was clearer here, the bottom visible despite the depth. And there they were, the stone formations, arranged in perfect circles around a central point. Not ruins as I'd first thought, but a structure still being built. The creature's true body rested at the center of the stone circles, a pulsing, translucent mass about the size of a car. Within it, darker shapes moved, organs perhaps, or the absorbed consciousness of its victims. This was the core from which all the tendrils extended, the heart of the entity. As I approached, I felt resistance, not physical, but mental. The creature didn't want me near its core. The water around me churned as tendrils moved to block my path, not attacking, but creating barriers. I pushed through, my transformed body allowing me to stay underwater far longer than should have been possible. I no longer needed to surface. For air, my skin seemed to extract oxygen directly from the water. When I finally reached the core, I understood what the stone structure was for. It was a conduit, a way to extend the creature's influence beyond the lake. The patterns channeled, energy or whatever force the creature used to manipulate water, outward in specific directions, toward rivers, toward groundwater reserves, toward the distant Mississippi. I removed the vials from my waterproof bag. The blue powder inside seemed to glow slightly against the creature's translucent body. This close, I could feel its ancient intelligence examining me, trying to understand my intentions. More images flooded my mind. What would happen if I joined the creature instead? It would spare Harold, would hibernate voluntarily for decades, would give me knowledge no human had ever possessed. For a moment I hesitated. The offer was tempting, to become something more than human, to experience consciousness in a way no one else ever had. But then I saw Lillian's desiccated body floating at the lake's surface. I remembered the sheriff and deputy walking trance-like into the water. I thought of the dried husks of animals along the shore, and I knew what I had to do. I broke the first vial against the creature's core body. The blue powder dissolved instantly in the water, creating a cloud that sank into the translucent flesh. The effect was immediate. The core body contracted violently, tendrils thrashing in pain or shock. But it wasn't enough. The creature was too large, too powerful for one vial. I broke a second, then a third. Pain shot through my own body as the compound took effect, like fire in my veins, like all my moisture was being boiled away. My transformation had linked me too closely to the creature. What hurt it, hurt me too. With fading strength, I broke the remaining vials, making sure the powder spread throughout the core body. The water around me churned as the creature convulsed. Tendrils that had been gentle before now lashed out in agony, one wrapping around my leg with crushing force. I was being pulled into the core, absorbed like so many victims before me. But the creature was also changing. The blue compound, forcing its massive body to contract, to harden, to enter the hibernation state that Dr. Ellis had described. As I was drawn into the core, I had a moment of perfect clarity. The creature wasn't evil. It was simply following its nature, as all living things do. It needed to feed, to grow, to reproduce. That it caused suffering was incidental, not intentional. And in that moment, I realized I could guide it. If my consciousness was being absorbed, perhaps I could maintain some influence, some control over this ancient entity. My body passed through the membrane of the core. It should have been horrifying, but instead felt like slipping into a warm bath. Inside, I could sense the others who had been absorbed before, faint echoes of consciousness still existing within the creature's collective mind. The blue compound continued its work. The core body was shrinking, hardening, entering dormancy, and it was taking me with it. With my last moments of separate consciousness, I focused my will on one thought: Sleep. Sleep for decades. Sleep without feeding, without hurting others. Whether the creature understood or simply had no choice as the compound took effect, I'll never know. But I felt its vast awareness begin to dim, like a light being turned down gradually. The stone structure collapsed as the tendrils withdrew. The core, with me inside it, settled onto the lake bed. The last thing I saw through the translucent membrane was the sunlight filtering down through the water, growing more distant as we sank into the mud. Then darkness and dreams. So many dreams. The lake filled again over the following weeks. Spring rains added to the water level until all evidence of the receded shoreline disappeared. The stone formations were once again hidden beneath the surface. Harold did as I asked, burning my manuscript and notes. He continued as caretaker of the property, watching for any signs of the creature's return. But the lake remained calm. 30 years passed. Harold grew old and died. His son took over the watch, trained to recognize the signs, to maintain the vigil. In the summer of 1994, a young writer arrived at Stillwater Lake, seeking isolation to complete her novel. The rental agency told her the lake house had a distinguished history. A famous horror writer had once stayed there in the 1960s, but had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind a completed manuscript that later became a bestseller. The book told the story of a man who sacrificed himself to contain an ancient water creature. Critics called it fiction. The locals knew better. On her first night at the lake house, the young writer found a package addressed to her, though it had no postmark or return address. Inside was a leather-bound book, a journal, and a note that read simply, "Be careful of the well water." That night, she dreamed of swimming in the lake, of stone circles on the bottom, of a voice calling from the depths. The voice sounded desperate, lonely, and somehow familiar, though she'd never been to Stillwater Lake before. In the morning, she noticed the water level had dropped by several inches overnight, despite there being no drought. At the newly exposed shoreline, she found a small stone with strange markings carved into it, and she felt thirsty. So very thirsty. The story you're reading now is a warning. If you find yourself near a lake called Stillwater, pay attention to the water level. If it starts to recede for no apparent reason, leave immediately. If you see stone circles beneath the water, don't swim there. If you meet a caretaker named Winters, listen carefully to what they tell you, and whatever you do, don't drink the well water. I'm still here, you see, trapped in this ancient thing that sleeps beneath the mud. My consciousness preserved alongside dozens of others absorbed through the centuries. The creature is stirring again. 30 years have passed. The hunger grows, and this time I'm not sure I can stop it. Because after decades of sharing its dreams, I'm no longer sure I want to. The water is calling you too, isn't it? Come in. The water's fine, just don't go too deep.